About 5 years ago, me and my husband went to a couple's holiday to Paris with a few friends of ours. I was awfully excited about the whole thing. A friend of mine had invited us to join her and her husband, and some of the links she sent me were just gorgeous. She'd booked a 2-bedroom Airbnb in this place called Palaiseau, a quaint little French village about 15 minutes' drive from Paris, which meant we could soak up a bit of French country living in between a full day's shopping and dining in Paris itself. It seemed like it would be a dream weekend break for me. I mean, there's no place more romantic than Paris, right? So, we get the Eurostar over to Paris, have a bit of lunch there, pick up a rental car, then drive out to the Airbnb. I was just buzzing. I'd be practicing the little bit of French I'd learned in school, and although I was a bit terrible, the French people were so nice about it. I'd heard that they'd be really rude, and it was just lovely how that turned out to be just a myth. Lunch was lovely, and the house was just gorgeous. Me and a friend had a nice catch-up while we explored the house, and we let the boys be boys for a little while, fawning over how adorably French everything was. The back garden was amazing too, this big green lawn that just opened up into a dense patch of woodland at the end. I was in heaven. It was still a bit chilly out, but the place was just serene, and it really was so romantic. I had no idea that our little bubble of romantic bliss was about to be so horribly ruined. We had this really lovely dinner in a little local brasserie, then wandered back to the Airbnb in the dark, admittedly a little drunk. Grateful to be back in the warmth, we carry on drinking in the Airbnb's kitchen for a while, and my friend's boyfriend is messing around and exploring all the cupboards and drawers in the kitchen. This is how he finds a flashlight. Quite a cheap one from what I could tell, but it prompted him to want to explore the dark woods at the end of the garden. We were all just joking about how he'd obviously be the first one to die in a horror movie, but unfazed and a bit tipsy, he goes out nonetheless to explore the end of the garden. He's out there for about 10 minutes, and meanwhile we're all just chatting away, planning our little day trip into Paris the following morning, and we just hear this scream. We all go quiet, realizing it's my friend's boyfriend who just screamed at the top of his lungs. He then comes running into the back door and starts asking, "Who speaks the best French? Because we need to call the police right now." My boyfriend accused him of trying to pull a prank at first, but you could just tell he was genuinely scared, and he honestly went white as a sheet. He's like, "I swear on my mom's life, this is not a joke. We need to call the police." A bit of panic ensues before he finally blurts out that we're not in any obvious danger, but we still need to get the police out to us because there's an actual dead body in the woods at the back of the house. Our jaws are on the floor at this point, and my boyfriend was still in such a state of disbelief that he demanded to go out and see it for himself. My friend's boyfriend, who was the one who found the body, starts saying, "You don't want to do that, man. Honestly, she's not in a good way." The reason he was so freaked out is that it wasn't just a dead body, some poor elderly person that had fallen over and hit in their head or something. The guy said it was really obvious that this person had been killed, like they were a mess. We got the police out, and thankfully one of them spoke really good English, so my friend's boyfriend could tell them how he found the body. While that's going down, the rest of us are just looking for somewhere else to stay for the night, settling on a 4-star hotel in central Paris. The entire trip was ruined. We thought we could just duck out and enjoy the rest of the weekend, but the police wanted to talk to us the next day too. Apparently, if it wasn't for the obvious foul play, we'd have been free to leave. But basically, we'd wanted a romantic weekend away and ended up sort of being suspects in this random French person's murder. Obviously, we were finally cleared and we were able to travel back home, but the whole thing was just terribly horrifying. Weirdest thing was is that the owners asked us for good reviews afterwards, even though we found a dead body on their property. Of all the surreal, insane aspects of that trip, that took the cake. My family loves Christmas. We're some of the most annoying people that start putting up the Christmas decorations in mid-November and playing Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You for the first time every year has become a bit of a ritual. My husband and my 3 daughters always wear their matching pajamas, which I love, and although cooking Christmas dinner can be a bit stressful some years, I just adore being that family that all the relatives flock to when the festive season comes around. There's only one big problem. We're Australian. Time for a quick explanation. In America and Europe, Christmas takes place during the winter, obviously, but the months surrounding December are some of the hottest in the Aussie calendar. Down under, you are more likely to be sunbathing with your Santa hat on than sipping warm eggnog by a log fire. But just like everywhere else, pretty much all of our festive imagery consists of snow-covered winter wonderlands, fields caked in snow, and little robins red-breasted nestled in the bough of a pine tree. But where we live, in a place called Darwin, it's a lot more palm tree than pine tree. Like my 2 kids have never even seen snow, and in 2019, we wanted to change that. So even though people called us crazy for doing it, we booked flights over to a freezing cold Europe in late November. The whole trip was absolutely amazing. I found the flights to be a bit of a pain, but seeing some of Europe's most incredible sights given a festive twist by a dusting of snow was worth every minute of being stuck in that cramped demon tube. We saw Prague, Berlin, Rome, Copenhagen, Paris, and London. But what my family seemed to be looking forward to the most was seeing Ireland for the first time. The kids seemed to have it in their heads that it was some magical place full of fairies and such, and could barely contain their excitement, while the prospect of drinking Guinness straight from the tap had my husband almost as giddy as our 2 little girls. We arrived at this little Airbnb out in the suburbs of Cork, a semi-detached rental that looked like something out of a storybook, and before anyone even puts their bags down, they're clamoring for the Wi-Fi password. No, my husband works in IT and internet safety is something of a passion of his, not just because it's his occupation, but because he knows it'll help keep our daughters safe from some of the darker things that are out there in cyberspace. You'd have to ask him for all the details regarding the thing he does, but whenever we arrived at an Airbnb somewhere, my husband would like to scan the network to make sure it had parental locks and was otherwise secure. So, he's tapping away on his laptop as I'm having a quick cup of coffee when I notice this particular look on his face, one I'd come to recognize as meaning, I don't like this at all. I take a seat next to him on the couch, leaning over to take a look at what's bothering him. All I can see is computer nonsense on the screen. I've never been very tech-savvy, so, much to my chagrin, I have to ask him to explain to me. He points to this line of text and explains that it told him that there was already a device connected to the Wi-Fi network when we arrived. He shows how he could account for all our phones and his laptop being connected, but there was one mystery device somewhere. Then he opens up another window and points towards a little icon, one that was clearly a little picture of a camera. Me being me, I try and see the positive side, suggesting that it's a security camera installed on the exterior of the property, but my husband does a lap of the building and says he couldn't see any kind of device anywhere. It's at that point that he starts trying to work some of his IT magic, and a few minutes later, I hear him calling me back into the kitchen in one of those dad voices like something is wrong, but I can't tip off the kids. His eyes are all wide as he points towards his laptop screen again, and on it is a video feed of the bedroom our girls were planning on staying in, like a top-down view, as if the camera were on the ceiling. We just go running up to the girls' room to find that the camera had been hidden inside a smoke detector that was directly over one of the beds. We still don't quite know who, but someone had been planning on watching our daughter sleep, which is just about one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me and the family. My husband calls over the owner of the property right away to ask him why there was a camera installed in one of the kids' bedrooms. At first, the owner denied having CCTV on the property in the first place, and had the nerve to suggest that the video feed was coming from another property in the area, as if I wouldn't recognize my own bloody children. My husband had to actually threaten to send them a screenshot of the video feed to get them to admit it, and then they came out with a load of garbage about simply wanting to protect their assets. My husband then accused the person of being a voyeur and that he'd be reporting them to Airbnb, at which point they got all tongue-tied and couldn't think of anything to say. And then they just hung up. We called them out on being a creep, and they didn't have a word to say in their own defense. We were absolutely furious and thoroughly creeped out, having only narrowly avoided having that absolute dog staring at our kids all night. And even though it was quite late in the evening at that point, me and my husband got the kids to pack their things while we looked for a hotel nearby. It took us a good few months of emailing back and forth with Airbnb's customer complaints department, but we eventually got the refund we were most definitely entitled to. Airbnb also reassured us that they'd banned the homeowner from renting properties using the service, which did far more for my peace of mind than any amount of cash would have. I know there are people out there with those kinds of twisted desires and stuff, but never for a second did I ever think I'd run into one myself, let alone on our dream Christmas vacation over to Europe. The only thing that really worries me now is Airbnb's ability to keep this person and people like him off their platform altogether. My husband and I have pressed them on the systems they have in place to ensure their customers' safety, but they simply don't have any satisfactory answers. We made the point that this horrible voyeur could easily set up an account in the name of a friend or relative and simply continue recording people's kids against their knowledge, and the legalese email we received in response basically said, "We have no idea what to do about it." And that's the fear I'm left with, that somewhere out there is a little girl, lying peacefully in her bed, who has no idea that some Irish creep is watching them, doing God knows what while he does so. Me and a close friend of mine decided to get an Airbnb in New York for a week's worth of birthday celebrations one year, and we were both really excited about the whole thing. The listing my friend had managed to find us consisted of the 2 top floors of an old townhouse, and it looked absolutely stunning. I think people are so focused on the sleek skyscrapers and other modern amenities that we associate with NYC that we forget how old it is too, and how a lot of that history is written into the architecture of some of the city's oldest buildings. So, we catch a flight over, arrive at the Airbnb, and it's everything we could have wished for. Even better, the owner lived on the ground floor of the building, so if we needed anything, he was just downstairs. Brilliant, right? Nope. Wrong. Like most things, you don't really know what you're dealing with until you're actually rubbing noses with it. The guy's checking us in, asking if we have any questions or anything, and otherwise being perfectly welcoming. Then all of a sudden, just as we're saying thanks and all that, he's like, "Oh, girls, by the way, there should be a large duffel under one of your beds. Under no circumstances are you to touch it." A little awkward silence follows where me and my friend are kind of like, WTF? And then we ask him if he doesn't want us to, grab the bag before we settle in, since it's obviously something quite private. He then responds with, "No, that's where it lives." Where it lives? What the actual F is that even supposed to mean? What is it, anyway? It sounds stupid now, but we just sort of laughed it off. We were in New York after all, and a city where everyone was a little bit crazy, we thought. Why let a little bit of kookiness ruin what would otherwise be an amazing birthday week, I thought. So, first night, I did actually take a peek under the bed and discovered that it was actually my bed that had the bag sitting under it. Lucky me. It looked perfectly clean. No weird smells coming from it, so no dead body. Winning, I thought. It didn't seem particularly stuffed with anything, but there were definitely things in it. Nothing that jingled or ticked like one of those old cartoon clock bombs, so whatever was in there couldn't be all that bad. And besides, it wasn't any of my business. Second night, and I'm a little bit more curious, but still, I can control myself and I just leave the bag be. Third day, me and my friend actually talk about it a little bit, trying to imagine what it could be in there. I mean, there was no way he really and truly didn't want us to look in the bag, or he'd have taken it out of there before we ever checked in, right? But the question remained, What exactly was in that he either did or didn't want us seeing? I started feeling really uncomfortable about the whole thing, especially since it was under my bed and not hers. My friend can read this in me easy peasy and start saying stuff that it's all the fella's murder weapons and that I'm going to be his next victim. Maybe that had gotten a response in the past, but under those circumstances, not funny in the least bit. And as you might have guessed, by the third night, the horrible curiosity had been gnawing away at my gut and getting the better of me. I'm lying there in bed, totally unable to sleep, and I can hear my friend snoring from the other room. Not that the walls were thin or anything, she just snores that loud. All I'm thinking is, I can take one look, one little peek, and the guy's never gonna know, is he? I don't bother to wake my friend up. I'm just thinking, in and out, pretend it never happened, job done. So I slip off the bed as quietly as I can, reach for the bag. I'm honestly like a ninja with how quiet I'm being, like pulling the zipper open super slowly so it doesn't make any noise, and the whole time the tension is rising for me like, God, what's in the bag? When I finally saw, I had to bite my fist to stop from laughing. The first thing I see when I look into the bag are toys. Toys of an adult nature. And that's all we'll say about that. I think it was just the break in the mood for me, worrying it was the mummified corpse of his mother or something when it was just a rubber knob. But looking back on it, even that was super creepy. But the thing that actually made me wake up my friend to be like, I think we need to get out of here, were the clothes that I found in the duffel. I'll be honest, my curiosity got the better of me, and in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say. I shouldn't have just started going through this guy's stuff, but oh my God, am I so glad I did. Because aside from the toys was stuff that actually made the hairs in the back of my neck stand on end. Pacifier, adult diapers, oversized adult pajamas with a colorful childish pattern on them. There was a lot of other stuff too, but lots of it was honestly too upsetting and messed up for me to want to write about. Thinking about what this fella got off to knocked me sick. Look, I'm not one to kink shame or anything, but I think we can agree that that kind of stuff is just wrong. Weird at the very least. So there I am. It's about 1:30 in the morning, and I'm wide awake with my mind going a mile a minute. The thing that swung it in the end for me was the fact that he brought the bag up in conversation to us. It's not like I was just being nosy and happened to be going through his stuff. No, like my friend said, if he really didn't want us to go through it, he wouldn't have mentioned it, and he wouldn't have stashed the thing in one of the rooms we'd be staying in. I just didn't feel safe there anymore, and I knew my friend wouldn't either once she knew what was in the bag. Cut to an hour later, and we packed up all of our stuff, again being as quiet as possible. The plan was just to leave the keys on the kitchen table, sneak out, and then just explain the situation to Airbnb and hope for a refund. We could just get out of there, clean break, never have to see him again. But that would have been way too easy, wouldn't it? Because right as we start carrying our heavy bags downstairs, we make way too much noise. I remember how hearing the bolt on his front door working just made my blood run cold. But we were trapped on the stairs. We couldn't leg it. We just had to walk past him, trying not to make eye contact. "Leaving early, are you?" he said to us. I just had to grit my teeth and nod. Then he said, "You looked in the bag, didn't you?" As soon as the words left his lips, I had to make eye contact with him. Something about how brazen he was about it, how he just knew what was going on. It was so freaky. I think he must have read it in my face too, like the shock of how hard what he'd said hit home. He knew I had. He knew I hadn't been able to help myself. And he just smiled. This smug, sickening grin just stretched across his face, and he didn't say another word to us as he filed out of the apartment building and started off down the sidewalk. The whole thing actually ruined our trip for a couple of days. It was all we could talk about, all we could think about. And even when we just tried to forget about it and enjoy ourselves, it followed us around like a dark cloud. It wasn't until we got in touch with the police and told them what I'd found that we were able to regain any peace of mind. Obviously, the police couldn't do anything about it. Owning stuff like that wasn't a crime, no matter how perverse. Like, he didn't have any pictures, if you catch my drift, so all they could do was recommend that we take it up with Airbnb. I do still worry about it, though, and I really hope he hasn't hurt anyone. We got him kicked off Airbnb after he wrote a really rude review about us. I emailed a member of the customer service team back and forth and explained exactly what had happened. So, there was some small silver lining. It's the only time it happened, too. All the other hosts we've dealt with on Airbnb have been fantastic. But that being said, it only takes one bad experience to really paint your opinion of something, doesn't it? There was a point a couple of years back where I decided that discovering Airbnb was the best thing that ever happened to me. And the weirdest thing was that the whole thing had blossomed from one of the worst things to ever happen to me. I've known friends and colleagues that have lost a parent and just sort of took it on the chin. Their death came at an advanced age or after a long illness. It was something they could accept. But when I lost my dad out of the blue in 2017, it hit me really hard. He was fit and healthy, a really careful sort of bloke, and I doubt anyone could say the same for the drunk driver that plowed into him that Thursday evening. The only thing that was supposed to cushion the blow were the savings and life insurance payouts that the family got. I mean, it was a lot of money. Dad must have been squirreling it away for years, enough to pay for my little sister to go traveling for what turned out to be a heck of a long time. But I didn't want the money. I just wanted Dad back. I had to wait for the grief to subside before I could decide what to do with it, and instead of just splurging it away, I decided to make an investment. It was around that time that a friend mentioned Airbnb and how an uncle of hers was making a killing from renting out a flat they owned in the city center. It was a bit daunting spending that amount of money, but I took the plunge. Then after refurbishing the flat and posting an advert on Airbnb, I had my first booking within a week. The income was unreal. Within 6 months, I'd made half the money back, so I invested in another place. A year in, I was flush with cash, and even though I kept my full-time job, it got to the point where I didn't actually have to work anymore. Cue fancy holidays, a huge car upgrade. Life was good. Then, boom, COVID hits, and my Airbnb income completely dried up. Remember when we all thought COVID would be over in a few weeks or months? What sweet summer children we were, and I was no different. I had no idea it'd get so bad that I'd have to straight up rent one of the flats to be able to keep up my lifestyle. But luckily, it was a seller's market. You wouldn't think that'd be the case during a pandemic, but it suited me just fine. I was inundated with applications for one of the flats. I mean, I got literally hundreds of people applying on that open rent website. Finding the right tenant was a lot more work than I thought it would be. Interviewing all the various applicants was a pain. There was some right weirdos applying for the tenancy, and the more I dawdled over who to choose, the more money I was losing. But then, one morning I waked to an email from a prospective tenant telling me they'd be willing to pay $350 extra in rent every month, but that they'd have to move in by the end of the week. They didn't even want a viewing. They were happy enough to move in based on the photos I posted online. 350 quid extra was 50% over the odds and way too good for an offer for me to turn down. When I gave the bloke a ring, they seemed normal enough. It was a pretty much done deal. All I had to do was hand him the keys. But when I actually met the bloke last December to do a masked up sanitizer soaked socially distanced key handover, they seemed anything but normal. I'm all for wearing masks and stuff, don't get me wrong. I think we should be doing all we can to defeat this, but this guy was completely covered from head to toe. Black gaiter over his face, hat on, hood pulled over, gloves, the works. I had absolutely no idea who I was handing the keys to, really, just that they identified themselves as Stefan, and the same name as the account that contacted me. He barely spoke, and the whole interaction gave me a bad feeling, so I tell him I'll come by in a couple of days to see how he was doing. He'd already paid me 2 months' rent on top of his security deposit, so I was basically stuck with him for the time being. I was starting to think my desperation for cash was about to get me in a lot of trouble. About a week later, I give Stefan a ring to make sure he's settling in all right. I have to call him like 6 times before he answers, and when he finally does, he seems in no mood to talk, but he still somewhat reluctantly agrees to let me stop by. I start worrying about what sort of state the flat is going to be in, but little did I know that I wouldn't be seeing it at all. He refuses to open the door to me, citing social distancing and stuff, which I understand and respect, but there are ways to conduct a flat inspection without violating the whole 6-foot rule. I insist. He refuses. I insist some more. He refuses some more. And by the time it got to him threatening to call the police, any potentially good relationship we might have had goes right out the window. Right when he says that, I whip my mask down to make myself heard more clearly, and I catch this horrendous smell in the air, one that's so bad that it actually silences me for a moment. I find myself putting my mask right over my mouth and nose, and the argument with Stefan trundles along with him agreeing to send me a video of the flat's current condition. The conversation ends, but I hang around for a minute to try to work out where the horrible smell is coming from. It seemed to permeate the entire corridor, like it was almost impossible to work out its exact source, and with it being so intense, nor did I want to. I just prayed it wasn't coming from the apartment I just rented out. As you can imagine, I'm quite annoyed at that point, and as I walk back across the street towards my car, I turn back to have a look at the window of the apartment. Now, my eyes are terrible, but I could suddenly see that this Stefan character had all the curtains closed, but had opted to hang a weird kind of mask in the window. I think it was a papier-mâché or something, and it must have been really old because it looked all shriveled, with long, wiry black hairs framing this pretty creepy-looking face. I remember letting out an audible sigh like, Christ almighty, this is going to get so much worse before it gets better. And suddenly the mask just disappears back into the curtains. It wasn't just some creepy old piece of decor. Someone had been wearing it and watching me while they were doing so. Stefan then sends me a video of the flat, which looked fine, only there was one corner of the living room that he apparently refused to show me. I pressed him on it. He pretended not to know what I was talking about, and I just decided to quit while I was ahead. It took a week before I started getting complaints. Other tenants in the building, who must have gotten my number from the management company, started calling me up to complain about the noise and the smell coming from flat 20, the one I own. But then after a while, the calls stopped being complaints and started being more like warnings. Warnings about the things they'd heard coming from Stefan's flat, and how the smells had gotten considerably worse. But still, Stefan refused any kind of formal flat inspection, and he still does even now. I drove past the flat about 2 weeks ago now, one evening when I was driving home from work. I'd had a late one at the office, so it was about 9 at night when I decided to take a little detour to check out the flat. I was met with almost immediate regret. Apparently Stefan only uses red bulbs to light the flat after dark, and I'm staring up at the window like, what's this freak up to now? When I see 2 people, like, running or jumping around the living room, completely naked by the looks of things. He's obviously not the only one living there now, despite there only being his name on the lease. I suppose this isn't even really a story because it doesn't have an end yet. I've already decided that I'm not going to renew Stefan's lease of the flat, and that when his 2 months are up, I'll ask him to leave, or else get the authorities involved. But that's about the only thing I'm certain of right now. I've no idea what he's doing in my bloody property, what's making that bad smell, or who the other person is. Things have gotten pretty bad at this point, as I knew they would, but I have a really grim gut feeling that they can get infinitely worse, and that getting Stefan out of the flat is going to be much more trouble than I ever imagined it would. It's not even worth the money anymore. No amount of money is worth finding out that he's done something truly awful in there. I'll try to keep you guys updated in the future if I'm still in a fit state to do so, because only God knows what untold horrors await for me in that flat, and God knows what Stefan will resort to in his efforts to keep me and everyone else from finding out. Wish me luck, guys. Things are definitely about to get weird. My son used to be very active on something called Discord, which, from what I understand, is a messaging app for people who play video games. It allowed him to talk to people from all over the world that play the same games as him. So at some point, he broke the news to us that he'd been talking to a girl over in the UK named Lori. She and he had become friends, playing some sort of pirate game, playing together most days and talking pretty much all the time when they weren't at their computers. And eventually, he just up and asked her if she wanted to be his girlfriend, and she says yes. It was definitely a new concept for someone like me who grew up at a time when cell phones weren't even a thing, but I understand that we live in the digital age where new methods of dating are coming to the fore, so I just tried to be happy for him, as any mom should when their kid gets their first girlfriend or boyfriend. Plus, with an entire ocean between them, it's not like I have to worry about them getting accidentally pregnant or something. However, one Sunday afternoon, my son emerges from his boy cave for what seemed like the first time in days, walks into the TV room where me and my husband are sat, and with a very concerned look on his face. We asked him what the matter was, and he just kind of shrugs, tells us everything is cool, and then just kind of wanders out again. So as you can imagine, me and my husband give each other a look as if to be like, what was that about? My husband gets up, follows our son into the living room before gently prodding him about anything that might be bothering him. From what he told me, our kid was just doing that typical boyish thing of pretending that everything was fine, but in a way that tells us that he's obviously upset about something. My husband then told me he asked after Lori, with our son responding in an almost visceral way of like, "Why are you always in my business? Blah, blah, blah." He'd obviously touched on a sore subject, so our general conclusion was that he and Lori had broken up, and he just didn't want to talk about it. We weren't about to press him on it, so we kind of just left him to it to get over and move on to someone new. But over the next month or so, our son seemed to get increasingly depressed. He'd spend more and more time up in his room, only ever coming out to go to school or eat dinner and then just retreating back to his little boy cave. Like I said, we figured this was because he'd split up with his internet girlfriend, but one time my husband was walking past his room and blatantly heard him talking to someone via his little voice chat Discord thing, addressing them as Babe and, at one point, Lori. So apparently they're still talking at that point, but we still assume that they were having relationship issues, putting it down to the fact that they were like thousands of miles apart. I know long-distance relationships don't work at the best of times, even when people were just a few states away from each other. But these kids had an entire ocean separating them, so God knows how hard that must have been on them. Only, as we came to learn, that wasn't exactly the problem. It was something much, much darker. So as I said, our son seemed to be getting more and more depressed over the course of the month, and it got so bad that at one point that me and my husband discussed getting him a therapist or something, to nip the problem in the bud before it could morph into something less easy to deal with. But suddenly, out of apparently nowhere, he just perks up. One day he's looking better, feeling perkier, and is considerably more talkative. He actually seemed keener on spending more time with us too, which for a 16-year-old boy struck us as very unusual. I mean, not that we were complaining. It was nice seeing him feeling better about things, and we put it down to him meeting a new girl or just shutting out Lori from his life. This kind of sunny behavior carries on for like a week or so until one Saturday, when after coming down for breakfast, we don't see or hear from him for the rest of the day. Late in the afternoon, my husband goes up into his room, knocks on the door, and asks our son if everything is okay. He comes back down into the TV room, tells me there was no reply after knocking, then asks me if I'd seen him leave the house at all during the day. I tell him no, that if he had gone over to a friend's house or whatever, that he certainly hadn't let me know. Then my husband just kind of shrugs, tells me he has a headache, then walks off to the downstairs bathroom to get an aspirin from the medicine cabinet. Next thing I know, I can hear him springing down the hallway and up the stairs, his feet like boom, boom, boom as he rushed up to our son's room. I'm super confused, like what's going on, before walking out into the hallway. From where I'm standing, I can actually see into the downstairs bathroom, and what I see makes my blood run cold. We usually kept all our pain pills and other such medication in a little plastic first aid kit style thing. We kept that thing stuffed to the gills, and there it was, lying on the bathroom floor, almost completely empty. Then, like my husband before me, it hit me what had happened. So I sprint up to my son's room where I find my husband leaning over our boy's bed, shaking him like, "Wake up! Can you hear me? Wake up!" There's a pool of puke sitting on the bed next to his head, and he's completely unconscious, and there are empty pill trays lying on the floor nearby. As soon as I walk in, my husband runs back downstairs to call 911, and I take over the shaking and the wailing, begging him to open his eyes. Now, the only light in the room was coming from his computer monitors, so at one point I look over to it and see one of the most haunting things I've ever seen in my life. On the screen is a webcam window from the Discord thing I mentioned, and it displays the body of a young girl that's just kind of dangling in midair. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at, but when I did, I almost screamed the house down. She was hanging from something. I tried not to look, I really did. I just tried to focus on my boy as his dad ran back upstairs with emergency services on his cell. I should have told him not to look, but I was just distraught. I could barely speak as he walks back into the room and starts describing our son's condition to the dispatcher on the other end of the line. He's frantically talking away when he does pretty much the same thing as me, turns around to see the webcam window open and the girl's body hanging on the screen. He just froze and stops talking, long enough for me to be able to hear the dispatcher say, "Sir, are you there, sir?" At which point he snaps out of his daze and carries on talking to the person on the other end. It was he that then had the same presence of mind to turn off the computer, all the while giving the EMTs their home address and begging them to arrive as quickly as possible. Our son was taken to the hospital where he promptly has his stomach pumped. We stayed all night, waiting in the visitors area, and when a doctor finally approached us with an update on our son's condition, I found my heart racing as I prepared for the worst. But thankfully, we'd gotten him to the hospital just in time, and the nurses were able to pump his stomach and administer the necessary medication to counteract the effects of the things he'd taken already. He survived, barely, but the same couldn't be said for the girl on the computer screen, who we assumed was this Lori girl he'd been in the long-distance relationship with. When our son woke up and saw us in the hospital room, he burst into tears. He apologized over and over again, and we all just cried it out together. He then proceeded to spill his guts to us about what had happened, and I honestly couldn't believe my ears. It turned out that they'd formed a kind of pact together just the week before, right around the same time he seemed to have perked up and gotten out of the funk he was in. Apparently, that was what did it. That she and he had figured out a way to escape the pain they were suffering, and that the revelation had been some kind of boost to him, as morbidly insane as that sounds. We went ahead with booking him into therapy, and he's doing much, much better now. We don't monitor his online activities, as he figured he'd just find a way to subvert us, but we definitely don't allow him to have a computer in his bedroom anymore. And since then, me and my husband have made an effort to acquaint ourselves with the darker corners of the internet, and believe me, there are some days I wish I hadn't. Because my God, are there some horrendous things out there, things I wish I'd never seen, and that I'll never be able to get out of my head. I used to play a lot of Insurgency Sandstorm with a fixed set of guys and a few girls, and we used to organize using a Discord server. People came and went as time went by, but there were a couple of us that actually stayed in touch quite frequently outside of just organizing gaming sessions and became pretty good friends. Insurgency, for those that haven't played it, is one of those hyper-realistic military shooters that tends to get really, really intense and occasionally downright terrifying when it's at its best. I'm not saying we had this proper Band of Brothers vibe going. I know it's only a video game, but like I said, a handful of us ended up being pretty good friends and bonding over the intense level of teamwork required to win rounds, not to mention the sweaty-palmed, adrenaline-fueled firefights. One of these was a lad named Colin. One day, Colin tells us that he wouldn't be playing Insurgency for a little while because he had taken a job teaching English as a foreign language out in Indonesia. He had wanted to do some traveling for a while but just didn't have the money available to him, and getting qualified to teach English gave him an opportunity to see some more exotic areas of the world whilst getting paid for it. We were pretty gutted to hear the news. He was one heck of a sniper, and many a time we'd been pinned down by some enemy machine gunner only for the gunfire to stop suddenly, followed by a little laugh from Colin and a "have that" in his Scottish accent. We absolutely loved him for moments like that, but we were also really happy for him, and since he promised to stay in the Discord server, we'd be able to keep in touch and hear some stories of his adventures out in the tropics. So a few months go by, and we're enjoying hearing the stories of his travels, along with being updated with photos of him exploring some pretty remote parts of Indonesia. It was the photos of him with the school kids he was teaching that really made me smile, though. He looked like he was having the time of his life, especially when we saw some videos of him teaching the kids some pretty obscure English phrases. Not only that, but occasionally we'd hear some of the kids actually repeat the phrases back kind of in a Scottish accent, and the idea of a bunch of Indonesian kids learning to speak English with an Edinburgh accent was absolutely hilarious to us. I mean, imagine it. Some American wishing an Indonesia fellow good morning or something, only to hear, "You alright, pal? Who's it going?" In response, it still makes me chuckle, even now, to be honest. Then, in September of 2018, I woke up to the news that there had been an earthquake in the sea just off the coast of Indonesia, causing an earthquake that had resulted in a massive tsunami that had destroyed huge sections of the country. Immediately, I thought of Colin. I jumped onto Discord using the app on my phone and sent him a message asking him if everything was alright and hoping he'd not been caught up in the tsunami. Obviously, there was a huge 7 or 8 hour time difference between the UK and Southeast Asia, and occasionally Colin didn't reply for hours, so the fact that he didn't immediately reply wasn't a massive concern to me. But he didn't reply all that day, to the point where I started expressing concerns to some of the other lads in the server, sharing the news of the tsunami with them and mentioning that I was worried Colin had been caught up in it. We knew from the news stories about which areas of Indonesia had been affected, but we didn't know exactly where Colin was, only that it was in some remote areas and didn't always have immediate access to Wi-Fi, another reason for us to not immediately worry. But he didn't reply the next day either, or the day after that, and it got to the point where a week had gone by and we'd heard nothing back from him. No one had seen Colin, even online, since we got news of the tsunami. That's when we really started to worry, and as the days went by, we got more and more frightened that something had happened to him. It's around then that I started going back through some of the messages he'd been sending over the previous month or so. He'd been all over Indonesia, and had spent his first few weeks in the capital city of Jakarta, which had remained relatively unaffected by the earthquake and subsequent tsunami. But then I found out that he'd traveled to a place called Palu to teach English there, and as far as I could tell, that's where he'd been at the time of the disaster when it struck. I then cross-referenced the name of the place with any stories about the tsunami, and found out that it had been one of the worst affected by a destructive tidal wave that apparently reached 23 feet in height. 23 feet of rushing water that had destroyed pretty much everything in its path and caused the deaths of over 15,000 people, and in all likelihood, Colin had been one of them. We were devastated, but the worst part is, even to this day, we still have not had any closure about it. We knew Colin quite well, but he kept his online and personal life pretty separate. We never knew his last name or the names of any of his family, so it's not like we could get in touch with them to find out if he really had died or not, or to see about any funeral arrangements if he had indeed perished during the tsunami. But I think the fact that even now his Discord account lies inactive is evidence of the fact that he did actually lose his life out there. Maybe he's okay, and he just never bothered to get back on Discord. Maybe his close encounter with death made him realize that video games were just a waste of time or something. But I think that's just wishful thinking on my part. In my heart of hearts, I know he's probably dead. I just hope he's at peace now, and whatever family he had are okay. Rest in peace, Colin. We still miss you. So a few years ago, I matched with a girl on Tinder who I ended up having some serious chemistry with. We go for coffee, coffee ended up being drinks, drinks ended up with sparks flying, and then boom, we're in the middle of this whirlwind romance. We're texting all the time whenever we're not just spending days at each other's apartments, fantasizing about taking vacations together, all the stuff two young people do when they got that new relationship energy going. But then one day, right when I think things couldn't get any more perfect, she sits me down with the obvious intention of having a pretty serious talk. I figured it was like a breakup type thing, so I braced myself for the worst. Only it's not quite as bad as I feared. It was just, well, weird. She tells me she's poly. At the time I had no idea what that meant, so I just sort of stared back at her with this confused look on my face, prompting her to explain that poly is short for polyamorous. For those that aren't entirely savvy with the term, it's basically a fancy word for when someone practices open relationships. The girl says she can commit to me, but that she'd have to be free to see other people, albeit in a less serious capacity. Being young, dumb, and totally besotted with her, I agreed to it, and it ended up being the worst decision I'd ever made. I started off by telling her she could do what she wanted, but only as long as she didn't tell me about any of it. She agrees to this, but as the weeks went by, I did start to get a little jealous. She sought to remedy this by introducing me to the app that she'd used to find other polyamorous types to hook up with, a little thing called Discord. Now, apparently it's primarily used for communicating in video games, but I learned that people use Discord for all types of weird stuff, including hookups. The girl tells me I'm welcome to join the server she was a part of and look for someone who was open to something casual. Fair's fair, I thought, so I did. I made an account and got her to invite me to a little server that was innocuously called The Farm, despite having absolutely nothing to do with anything remotely agricultural. So upon joining, the girl introduces me as her partner and gets a few of the members to walk me through all the various channels and such. They were actually pretty nice, talking me through some of the elements of polyamory and waxing lyrical about how nice the girl I was seeing was, which, I don't know, kind of warmed me up to the whole idea. I get talking to another girl on there, we vibe a little, but I can't see anything happening with her. I basically just did it to make the girl I was seeing happy, which apparently it really did. I had gained myself a lot of brownie points from it. So all is well that ends well, right? Nope. About a week into being on the Discord server, I get a message from someone at first I assumed was a girl. We swap greetings and make a little small talk, then I get a picture message coming through. It turns out this was not a girl at all. It was a dude, and the picture was the only thing I really did not want to see. What exactly it was, I'll leave up to your imagination. But just imagine the worst possible thing a perverted dude could send you over the internet, and yeah, you got it. He follows the picture up by saying he wanted to hook up with me and my girl at the same time. I just ignore the messages, assuming the dude is going to get kicked from the server for rule breaking or something, and eventually bring it up with my girl. She, on the other hand, vouches for this guy, saying she's been talking to him for a while, how he's normally perfectly nice and polite, and that I'm making a big deal out of nothing, claiming I'm just being jealous, etc. I tell her I'm super uncomfortable with the idea of a three-way hookup, how I want nothing to do with it, but again, that she's welcome to do whatever she wants, just as long as I don't have to hear about it. Drama smoothed over, and I think that's the end of it. Only it's not. Not by a long shot. Cut to like a month later, things are still basically going strong with the girl, and I'm out doing some grocery shopping when I notice something that catches my eye. It was one of those things that you just don't really pay attention to unless it happens. Like it's hard to describe. Pretty much every single person who walks into a grocery store either grabs a cart or a basket, right? And people just running in to grab one or two items are in and out in like a minute. So I remember seeing this one dude just kind of walking up and down the aisles with nothing in his hands and thinking like, what the heck is this guy doing here? But he's not doing anything too weird, so I just sort of move on. Only time and time again, I'm in an aisle grabbing things off of shelves, and I see him just kind of idling, and a few times we make eye contact. Nothing too creepy, just like a casual glance, but this happened over and over again, to the point where I was like, is this dude following me? Anyway, I get my shopping done, walk back to my apartment, and forget all about it. A few hours later, and I'm sitting in my apartment alone, just chilling and nursing some big food baby from a local Chinese place I got delivery from. I hear footsteps on the stairs outside my apartment. Heavy ones. Nothing unusual as such, but then the front door to the apartment just goes boom, shaking from some heavy impact on the other side. At first I thought it was a neighbor or something, so I shout out like, "What are you doing, dude?" But there's no reply. Just another loud bang against the door. They're not trying to get my attention. They're trying to break in. And I just about jump out of my skin, just like instinctively grabbing my phone to dial 911 while I run in my bedroom, kneeling down to the safe under my bed which has my .40 caliber in it. I tell the dispatcher what's going on. She then says the cops are on their way, but I have no idea how much time I've got, so I run back into the hallway with my pistol locked and loaded, aiming at the door and shouting that cops are on their way. But this does nothing to deter whoever's on the other side. They just keep slamming against the front door, and each time it seems like the door is closer and closer to just giving way. Only when I'm like, "I got a .40 here, buddy, don't make me do it," does the banging stop. And this is like perfectly timed to hear approaching sirens too. I then hear more heavy footsteps on the stairs outside, and then all is quiet. A short time later, I'm giving my statement to the cops that arrive. I have my phone in my hand, and I see a notification come up from the girl that I'm seeing that just says, "I'm sorry." I wait until the cops leave to call her to be like, "Why are you sorry? Is this us breaking up or whatever?" And when she answers, she's in tears. Through her sobbing, she tells me something that makes my jaw drop, and here's basically a summation of what she said. She's been hooking up with the guy who'd sent me the unwanted picture, who had apparently gotten super weird once he was in her apartment, telling her she needed to break up with me because he wanted her as his main partner. He went off about how I wasn't down with polyamory, how I wasn't good for her, blah blah blah, and when he's gotten aggressive about it, she'd kicked him out and told him not to contact her again. This guy is from a city on the other side of the state, and my girl figured that he'd just drive back home. Only he doesn't, and apparently he'd gleaned enough information about me from her, maybe even gone through her phone to get a look at some pictures of me to be able to actually track me down. And that's when it hits me. It was him in the grocery store, who had then followed me back to my apartment, waited until it was dark, then tried to break in to do God knows what. Confront me, beat me up, kill me, God only knows. Now this polyamory stuff wasn't just making me jealous, it was putting me in actual freaking danger. If that guy had only been a little more patient, waited for me to go outside to take the trash out, anything like that, I legit might not be around to type this experience out. And that scared the life out of me, as I imagine it would any of you. Me and the girl broke up shortly afterward. It was kind of sad, sure, but the whole experience had totally soured the relationship way beyond any kind of repair. We never talked again after that, but not before I told her to tell that creepy SOB that we'd broken up, that I wanted nothing to do with any of that anymore, and to leave me alone, or he'd be going back to his hometown in a wooden box. Now just hearing or reading the word Discord leaves a bad taste in my mouth, as I know the kind of creeps that are out there, using the internet for far worse than just some innocent kink stuff. A few years ago, I was part of a True Scary Stories server on Discord. It was a place where people would share their own personal stories of scary or spooky things that happened to them in their lives, and for a while it was honestly a lot of fun. Sure, a lot of the stories sounded made up and generally involved stuff like I saw a shadow figure at the end of my bed and other stuff that sounded like they were lifted straight out of a bad horror movie. But every so often someone would share a story that didn't have a hint of the supernatural in it, something that was actually believable, and occasionally, these stories were genuinely terrifying. I read a lot of seriously spine-chilling stuff on that server, but a lot of it I've forgotten over the years, probably because although they were creepy, they just weren't disturbing enough to actually stick with me. But there was one story in particular that I've never forgotten, because it's genuinely made me shudder to read. I hope the user in question doesn't mind if I share their story, and if they happen to read this, I'd like to think that they could let me know in the comments and maybe correct anything I got wrong, because I'm telling this from memory. But anyway, here goes. The poster began their story by assuring us that their story wasn't just some fabrication, and although they were pretty young when it happened, just thinking or writing about it as an adult was a pretty stressful experience for them. They went on to explain that their early years were marred by tragedy, how their dad had died when they were real young from a drug overdose, so they were raised by a single mom living in a small apartment just down the street from their grandma's place. Mom did some dating, though, obviously trying to do the right thing and find them a stepdad to give them some kind of father figure in their life. The incident in question happened while she was out on a date. Usually speaking, their grandma would babysit for them anytime Mom needed to go do anything that meant she couldn't bring them along. But on the night of her date, the grandma was working, so although it wasn't ideal, 9 or 10-year-old storyteller was left unsupervised in their mom's ground floor apartment. Sounds kinda irresponsible at first, but the storyteller was quick to reassure the members of the server that this was back when Yu-Gi-Oh was popular. As long as they had their cards and a box set of cartoons to keep them occupied, being left alone for like an hour or two certainly wasn't an issue for them. It's not like they were going to wander out of the apartment or get up to any mischief while their precious Yu-Gi-Oh was keeping them busy. But at some point during the evening, they're sitting there playing with their cards and watching TV when they heard a tapping on the window. Remember, they lived in the ground floor apartment, so pretty much anyone could have just walked up and started tapping on the glass. No climbing or levitating or any of that stuff was involved, so there was nothing inherently worrying or creepy about someone knocking on the glass. The storyteller then gets up, walking towards the window before drawing back the curtains, only to reveal the face of a complete stranger. Not their grandfather, not their uncle, but a complete and utter stranger. Surprised and confused, they back off from the window, letting the curtains slide back into place before this horrendous crash sounds. Broken glass tumbles onto the carpet at the foot of the curtains, before another smash sends more glittering shards onto the floor in front of them. At that point, they said they just tossed their Yu-Gi-Oh cards onto the floor and bailed. Rushing out of the back door of the apartment and over to a neighbor's house, pounding on the door in a state of abject terror as they looked over their shoulder every so often to ensure the mysterious predator wasn't hot in pursuit. But thankfully, the neighbor answers the door, lets our storyteller in, before taking the time to calm them down to get the full story out of them. Naturally, they called the cops immediately, who rushed over since they were given the description of a home invasion in progress. The neighbor then gets in touch with the storyteller's mom to let them know the awful news, who immediately rushes home to comfort their terrified son. Then after that, both the neighbor and storyteller's mom accompany them back to the apartment, where the cops are still searching the property and surrounding area for any sign of the attempted intruder. Apparently one of the cops approaches the mom at this point and shows her something in a clear plastic evidence bag. Mom stares at it, turns pale, then kneels down and hugs our storyteller tight, fighting to hold back tears as the neighbor guy is just like, my God. They both ended up staying at the grandma's place for like a week after while the window was repaired. And if that seemed like a bizarre amount of time to fix a window and that something else might be behind them staying away from the apartment for a while, you'd be right in thinking that. Our storyteller had their suspicions for a little while, but they were too young to really understand the implications of what had happened. The kind of danger they'd been in wasn't clear until many years later, when their mom explained to them just what happened that evening. You see, it wasn't just the window that was being replaced. The entire apartment was being fitted with new, incredibly sturdy locks, CCTV cameras, just about everything short of a panic room, all being paid for by Grandma and Grandpa. The whole family was absolutely terrified, and it was all down to the piece of evidence that the cops showed to the mom that night, the little thing in the clear plastic evidence baggie that made her turn ashen and squeeze our storyteller in a big, trembling bear hug. What was in that plastic bag was a photograph. A photograph of a young boy curled up in bed, sleeping soundly, and that boy was our storyteller. The mom told a much older storyteller that the photo couldn't have been taken long before the attempted break-in. Something about the sheets on the bed being fairly new or something. I can't quite remember. Or maybe it was a new haircut storyteller had gotten. But either way, it was some detail in there that made it clear that the attempted intruder had broken into the apartment somehow, maybe only a week prior, and taken a photograph of our storyteller while they slept. I can only imagine they had done so to several other children too, making a little catalog of potential victims, perusing them for hours on end before finally deciding on one they liked the most. I think that's what made my blood run cold back when I read their story. The idea that the intruder had taken this perverse liking to them, one that was strong enough for them to be unable to resist their urges, or whatever kind of sick, twisted desires had them smashing that window in that evening. The family only felt safe again when they heard the news that the creeper, whose M.O. was eerily similar to their own experiences, was caught by police and jailed after being extradited to another state. But they kept the whole thing a secret from our storyteller until he was in his late teenage years. There was no more details after that. There wasn't any grand conclusion, just that it was something that had haunted him for years. I never read anything as horrifying as that on that Discord server. It made everything else seem tame in comparison, and I stopped reading shortly afterward. It's weird how we seek out scary stories sometimes, just to give ourselves a little thrill, but end up being genuinely traumatized, not by the spoopy skeleton stories, but by things that we know could have easily happened, for real. This happened during summer when I was 7. I'm an 18-year-old female now. My mother was always working, so I was often left with my grandmother. She would always take me to eat, and after, if I was good, she would take me to the park. I usually got to pick where we ate, so I chose McDonald's. I was sitting down eating my Happy Meal, and my grandma got up to use the bathroom. As soon as she left, a man in his late 20s or early 30s sat down next to me and asked me if I wanted to come play a game. I, being the 7-year-old I was, said yes. He said it was a special game and that I couldn't tell anybody. At this point, my grandma was returning from the bathroom and started yelling at the man to get the hell away from me. He ran out the door, and I got in trouble for talking to strangers. We still ended up going to the park where I saw the man again. I was on the monkey bars and he asked me if I still wanted to play. Now I was starting to get a bit creeped out. I told him I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers and that my grandma was waiting for me. He said that if I won the game, I would get a present. I asked him where the present was, and he said it was in his car and that I should go with him to get it. I said no and started to run. He grabbed me and I started screaming. My grandma heard me and came running. She saw the man and got out her mace. He let me go, and my grandma sprayed him in the eyes until he was screaming. She called the cops on him, and he was arrested on the spot. We later found out he was a registered sex offender and a child molester. I am 14 years old and I live in Salt Lake City, just for a little background. And no, I am not a Mormon. Not that I have anything against Mormons or anything, I'm just saying. Anyways, the story goes like this. One day when my sister and I were young kids, about 10 years ago, we went to eat at McDonald's. As most kids do when they go to McDonald's, we love to play in the playland. So as we would always do, we played in the playland with my dad watching over us. After a while, my dad noticed a man in the playland taking pictures on his phone. He was a grown man, who I believe was somewhere in his late 20s. My dad was creeped out by this, so he confronted the man. My dad asked why he was in there, and the man replied by saying he was with his daughter in the playland. My dad told him to get out, as he was a grown man. The man then refused. The two of them got into an argument. My dad eventually punched up on the playland where the man was sitting and made the man jump up and slam his head. He then came out of the playland yelling at my dad. He then proceeded to leave the McDonald's with no daughter of his own in sight. This may not have been the scariest thing ever, but it's scary to think what the man's intentions were. It scares me to think that he might have taken photos of me or my sister. When my dad told me this story, I just laughed my ass off because of how my dad made this guy slam his head. But after some deep thought, I'm thoroughly creeped out. This happened about a year ago in my first semester of college. I went to an art school in New York City, and my suite mates and I had a craving for fast food at around 12:30 a.m. We decided on the McDonald's down the street because we're classy as fuck. It was me, my suite mate Kat, and her boyfriend Tom. We ordered our food. Kat and I decided to split a shit ton of chicken McNuggets and pick a table by the door. Tom and Kat are sitting next to each other, holding hands as couples do, and I'm sitting there being the awkward third wheel and gorging myself on nuggets. In walks a slightly disheveled gentleman who starts to wander aimlessly in the direction of the register. We think nothing of him. I watch as he goes to order his food and turn back to my friends to chat. Suddenly, Kat mutters, "Anna, behind you." So I turn around, and there's the slightly disheveled gentleman again. This time, he's holding a flashlight. I turn back around to Kat and shrug, figuring it's just some harmless weirdo. I feel a tap on my shoulder to turn. I turn around again, and the guy asks, "The light isn't working in the men's room. Can one of you hold this flashlight while I use the toilet?" Seriously? Kat, being the nicest and most outgoing person of the group, responds first. Maybe you tell an employee that the lights don't work. I bet they could figure it out for you." "It'll only be a minute," the guy mutters and holds the flashlight out to us. "Could one of you just hold this while I pee?" He insisted. Tom answered next as I was determined to ignore the man. "No, just go ask an employee to fix the lights." "But I'll only be—" The man began again, but I interrupted him with a firm, "Fuck off." It was a weird situation made only weirder when, as we were leaving, Kat said, "He never went to the bathroom in the first place. How would he know the lights didn't work?" When I was about 6 or 7, I used to take swimming lessons in a local pool after finishing school twice a week on Wednesday and Fridays. On Fridays, Mum would take me into McDonald's to get a milkshake as a treat afterwards. I'd sit and drink my shake, then we'd head home, no problems. This day was different. I'd finished my shake and wanted the toilet before we left. So in I went, into the ladies' on my own as I usually did. I noticed one cubicle was locked and thought nothing of it. Went in the second, did my thing, flushed and noticed that the person in the other cubicle was unlocking the door too. I hadn't heard them flush. I turned around, and it was a man. Old, disgusting, and tall. Why was he there? I innocently said, "This is for ladies only, mister." And he said, "Why do you think I'm in here, little girl? It's music to my ears. Where is your mummy?" He took a few strands of my hair and twirled them between his grim fingers and reached a hand to grab me by the shoulder. I shook out of his grip and ran as fast as I could back to my mum, crying. I told her what happened. She told an attendant, but by the time they checked, he'd managed to slip out unnoticed and into the busy street. I hope he never managed to get his hands on any little girls ever again. I work at a small McDonald's in an even smaller town in the South, and I've had encounters with many strange people and seen some fucked up things so far. But I saw something today that I thought I would never see and was shocked at how many people didn't notice or didn't care about what was taking place right next to them. I was working behind the counter at around 7 p.m. and we had lots of people in the lobby, a few children as well. I like kids, so I usually watch them play around in the lobby because they're really cute, but I got distracted by the large amount of customers we had to serve and ignored them for about 15 minutes. I looked back, when I heard a man ask in a small voice, almost whispering, "So, how old are you?" I turned around to see this extremely tall guy with a shaved head and a red shirt talking to a little girl who looked about 5 or 6. He had a little boy around the same age on his shoulders who was giggling. They were beautiful children with blonde hair and blue eyes. I saw that they were happy and the guy seemed friendly, but something in my head was extremely worried. I had a huge suspicion upon seeing this that these kids were not his own. What grown man would ask a little girl how old she is? And if he knew who they were, wouldn't he already know? Why would he care? But after this he said something that made my heart sink. "You should come with me now. I have a little brother who's 6 too. Let's go play with him." He then began to walk to the exit with the boy on his shoulders and the girl tagging along, and I immediately shot for the door to stop him, just as a lady with blonde hair came out of the bathroom shouting, "Hey, where are you guys going? Get over here!" The tall guy froze with his eyes as big as saucers. He was fucking petrified. The lady then scooped up the little girl in her arm and reaches for the boy as the tall guy lets him down, stammering, "Oh, I was just playing with your kids. They're really nice kids. I just really like children." All at once with a nervous smile. The blonde lady then faked a smile back, but still had eyes that clearly said, "Stay the fuck away from my children, you fucking creep." But her mouth ended up saying, "Oh, I'm glad you had a nice time, but we need to order now," and led her kids back to the restaurant. The tall guy then hurried out of the front exit, and the lady clutched her kids close to her the entire time she was there, even in their booth. If I ever see that guy at work again, I will immediately call the cops on him. Who knows what would have happened to those kids if I wasn't looking, or their mother hadn't come out of the bathroom at that very second. I do think it's awful that she left her kids unattended in a full restaurant lobby, but no one deserves to lose their children to a disgusting creep with a sick grin like that. My little sister was 12 when this happened, so just over a decade ago. My sister's always been very tall for her age and looks older next to her shorter friends. One time, she and her friends were out shopping and they decided to go to McDonald's to grab some lunch. That particular branch was hosting some sort of event for little kids to hang out with Ronald McDonald. Anyway, my sister sat at a table to hold on to it for everyone else while the rest of her friends went to buy their meals. My sister was sitting there quietly when the clown himself stopped by and smiled at her. She smiled back, but left it at that. Except he didn't move. He just stood there looking at her until she got increasingly uncomfortable. When he finally spoke, he asked her what she was doing there and how old she was. She told him she was 12, and he shook his head, saying he didn't believe it. He then told her how pretty she was and touched her arm. Luckily for my sister, her friend showed up just then, and he left pretty quickly. My sister, obviously freaked out a little bit, persuaded her friends to take their food outside and eat it elsewhere. She only told my parents and I about this a few years later. I don't know what that clown's intentions were, but she was not loving it. I went to middle and high school with a tall, skinny guy who I had occasional interactions with, but I always got a weird vibe from. In my senior year, I saw a Facebook post he made that said, "I bet I could get more kills than the Virginia Tech guy if I wanted to, but I don't want to." Despite him saying he didn't want to, I found this concerning enough to report to the school. Fast forward a couple of months later, he was out of JJC and, to make a long story short, he had found out I reported him. We had apparently made peace after smoking weed with some mutual friends, and it was enough for me to not expect getting jumped in the hallway at any time. We both ended up going to a local college, and I would see him around campus. Whenever he spotted me, we'd have these brief, awkward conversations about how life was going, and I would try my best to stay polite while not sounding creeped out. Then one day I was at McDonald's with my roommate when I hear someone whisper in my ear, "I'm going to kill you someday." I turn around to see him smile and wave at me. before walking away. I haven't seen him since then, but I always stay alert for the next random moment where I'll encounter him. Hopefully, what he said that day was just a joke. I'm a 23-year-old male in Florida, fairly introverted, hardly ever get out of the house. This encounter happened a few months ago. It was about 12 a.m. and I was getting a bit stir-crazy and needed to get out and just chill with someone. So I texted a special lady friend of mine. We made plans to do our normal routine of hanging out at this nice secluded park. I went and picked her up. We drove to our spot and spent a couple of hours just chatting about anything and everything. And then she got hungry, so we decided to hop in the car and drive down the road a bit to a McDonald's. Hooray for 24/7 fast food. This is where things started getting weird. We arrived at McDonald's and went inside instead of the drive-thru. She ordered her food while I went to the restroom to wash my hands. I'm a bit of a neat freak. I really wish I hadn't gone to the restroom that night. As soon as I walked into the restroom, I saw this guy standing at one of those heater-dryer things. Alright, not too weird. But then I noticed that he was kind of hunched over at it and wasn't moving. Whatever, I'll ignore him. I washed my hands and realized that he's standing at the only dryer in the place. The damn paper towels are also empty, so I awkwardly tried to ask the guy if he was done using the dryer. He didn't respond. Thoroughly creeped out, I just walk out and dry my hands on my shirt. I get out of the restroom and find my friend, and we sit down at a table to eat. Maybe 20 minutes go by, and we're headed back out to the car to go back to our spot. Well, my friend has to use the restroom, so I figured I might as well also. I mean, surely that guy has to be gone by now, right? Wrong. That guy is still standing at the dryer, mumbling something to himself now. I go into the stall and take a leak, and can hear him hitting the button on the dryer over and over again. I wash my hands and don't even attempt to get to the dryer. But then the guy moves as I'm trying to walk past him. He steps back, right in my path, and just looks at me. I notice he's around my age. He just stares at me and says, "Excuse me." Okay. I put my hands down, quickly say, "Pardon me," and rush around him to get out of the bathroom. 30 seconds later, as I'm waiting for my friend to get out of the ladies' room, the guy walks out. He just sits down at a table near me and is just staring straight at me. My friend walks out and notices the creep just eyeballing me. She jokingly asks, "Make a new friend in there?" I just shake my head at her and try to lead her out to the car without making it obvious that I'm wanting to run from the guy. Then he does the weirdest thing. He just starts cackling like a madman. I mean, straight up Joker laugh. I'm thinking to myself, oh shit, crazy druggy dude is going to do something bad. Then he just stops suddenly, looks down at my feet and says, "Nice shoes. Osiris?" Osiris is a brand of shoe, by the way. I managed to mutter, thanks, and quickly walk away out to the car. As my friend and I are getting into the car, we notice the guy staring at me from inside the McDonald's, just straight eyeballing me, a death stare. Then he stands up and starts booking it towards us. He wasn't running, but he was like speed walking. He bursts through both doors of McDonald's and starts coming right at us, and now he looks angry. I pulled out of the parking lot so fast, it's a damn good thing the roads were empty. My friend and I went back to our spot and hung out some more. Every car that we saw in the distance, I kept freaking out, expecting it to be the weird guy following us. My friend just teased me about it the entire night, and still teases me about it to this day, about how I made friends with a creeper in the bathroom who liked my shoes. Back in the 90s, when I was 3 years old, my mom and I were making the 4-hour drive in our minivan to my grandmother's house to visit. When I was little, I screamed from the time I was buckled into the car seat until the time that I was unbuckled, no matter how long the drive was. So, my mom stopped at McDonald's to let me play on the slides and to give her ears a break from my screaming. My mom had a specific way she loaded me into the van. She was afraid of accidentally locking me inside, so she never buckled me in, closed the door, then got into the driver's seat. Instead, she climbed into the back of the van with me, locked the doors, buckled me in, then climbed up into the driver's seat. When we left McDonald's, she went through her normal ritual of putting me in my seat. Once she climbed in and locked the doors, she started buckling me in. Suddenly, she hears someone trying to open the driver's side door. She looks up and sees a crazed man clawing at the two doors on the driver's side trying to get in. He then runs around to the other side and tries those doors while yelling to let him in. My mom starts yelling that she is calling the police, and the man turned and ran behind the building. My mom jumped in the driver's seat and sped away. She never told anyone this story until recently because it scared her so badly. If she hadn't locked the doors behind her, who knows what would have happened. My best friend Liz and I went to Six Flags in Atlanta for her birthday, along with her sister Marie and their mom Lena. We had a great time, but didn't exactly want to spend all of our money on the expensive food the park had. So, at around midnight, we leave the park and look for the nearest McDonald's. You would think that a McDonald's in this day and age would be an easy find, but we drove about 30 minutes before we saw a sign for one. McDonald's, 1 mile to the right we saw. We drive to the McDonald's and order. You could already tell we weren't in the best part of town. The McDonald's was not up to date, nor was there anyone there in the surrounding parking lots. Either way, we were hungry and didn't care. Once we got our food, we pulled up to a spot to distribute the food between us. I will point out here that Lena's window was down, so Lena, Marie, and Liz are arguing about who gets what food, and I'm looking out the window. To our left, I see a tweaked-out woman and man talking to each other hurriedly and pointing at our car. My alarms were going off, but I didn't want to make a big deal out of something that could be unimportant. Well, the man takes off, and the woman starts coming straight towards our car. I immediately yell to Lena, "She's coming!" And Liz looks up and goes, "Mom, we have to go." Lena's oblivious until Marie also chimes in about it. This woman is about 10 feet from our car. Lena goes, "Oh shit," and starts going in reverse. The woman yells, "I just need some help." And Lena says, "Sorry, I can't help you." We speed out, and I look over. The man and woman are running across the 4-lane road into the woods. Sure, she totally just wanted some help. We were sure that we were about to get mugged and robbed, but thankfully, we never gave them the chance. I was living in a low-income housing apartment in Minnesota, and at the time my mom and I simply couldn't afford to have an actual internet provider. This meant I leached off of people in my building who had an unprotected wireless connection. Whenever their internet connections would go out, I would be forced to walk down to McDonald's in order to use the free Wi-Fi there. This had become a pretty common thing for me. On one of those internet droughts, I was standing about in the lobby of my apartment about to leave when the guy who lived next door to me, an older guy named Joe, stops me before I go. He tells me that him and another of my neighbors were going to McDonald's for coffee and that he'd buy me one if I went along. I figured why not. I didn't really know much about Joe since I mostly kept to myself. Let me explain Joe. He's hunchbacked with a beer gut, and his ZZ Top-esque beard was full of food crumbs that I can only assume were from a McBiscuit. But he seemed like a nice enough guy, so I went along. After a ride in his rickety truck through the Minnesota winter, I was happy to reach McDonald's. Free Wi-Fi at last. And if Joe held up to his word, a free McCoffee as well. I sit down and fire up the laptop to soak in all that free Wi-Fi. Soon after, Joe comes back with our McCoffees. As soon as he sits down, he starts asking me in a raspy voice, "So, ever go on God's DNA?" I look up from the Windows loading screen and ask him, what? I was totally baffled and thinking, great, stuck with another fucking missionary. God damn it. He goes on to inform me that God's DNA is the molecules that hold the universe together, not to mention it's what makes men genetically superior to women. I sure as shit didn't learn that in physics class, so I blew him off, and when I got the chance, quietly ducked into another booth to browse the internet in peace. He didn't seem to notice because afterwards a barrage of freaky bearded lumberjack dudes would come in and out of the McDonald's and talk to him for like 15 minutes at a time. I can only assume they were talking about God's DNA because I did my best not to pay any attention, but Joe and his gang of weirdos still gave me a very creeped out feeling. I could tell that they kept looking over to stare at me when they thought that I wasn't looking. Having had enough weirdness for the night, I decided to duck out when he hopped off to the bathroom, I assume only to take an epic McShit. I took my chance, folded up the laptop and headed out to brave the cold Minnesota winter on the way back home. I reckon that having put up with the elements was preferable to being around a bunch of weird-looking lumberjack creeps. I was almost back to the apartment when I heard the truck, slowly rolling up and crunching the snow. I looked over my shoulder and I saw Joe in his truck. Next to him was another one of those fucking bearded bums from McDonald's. I waved to them, but I got no response. Whatever, I thought. I went home for the night after that creepiness. But then after that, every night after that, every time I went to the McDonald's, either Joe or one of his weirdo lumberjack buddies would be there. I could practically feel them leering at me. They always appeared grungy and disheveled. Forced to go to McDonald's just to use the internet, I tried avoiding them as much as possible. It almost seemed as if they knew ahead of time that I was going to be there. Considering they all had a relationship with Joe, I think it is very likely that they actually did. Eventually, someone broke into Joe's apartment and stole his bicycle, prompting him to move elsewhere. I learned a couple of things about Joe after he left the apartment, such as that he traded most of his food stamps every month for drugs, and that he regularly told women in our apartment that he wanted to leave his body and spirit and ravish them in their sleep, whatever that meant. After this point, I saw the McDonald's stalkers only sparingly, and then never again. But I'm thankful that I never gave Joe's spirit a chance to ravish me. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was 15 or 16 years old, my mom took me to McDonald's for lunch. We went inside of the restaurant and my mom immediately headed to the bathroom. When I rounded the corner to get in line, I noticed something weird was going on. There was a man at the counter acting super strange, and lots of people in line were backing away from him and gathering into a little crowd further back. The man started shouting loudly at the woman behind the register and banging his fists on the counter. He lifted up his shirt to expose himself to the lady and started yelling extremely vulgar things to her. This is where I stepped in. Since no one else was intervening with the situation, it was my time to shine, I thought. Being a young punk-influenced teenager, I thought I was going to be the hero. I walked right up to the man and shouted something along the lines of, "Oi, dickhead, the fuck are you doing? Shut the fuck up and leave." He turns around and exposes his chest to me and yells gibberish at the top of his lungs. I then thought it would be a good idea to swing a fake punch at him to scare him off. Bad idea. He immediately digs into his pockets and pulls out a huge knife. I don't even know how he was stashing that thing in there. He just holds it out in front of him and starts yelling some more. Everyone who was previously in line behind me scatters and starts yelling. At this point, lucky for me, my mom came out of the bathroom and noticed I was in some sort of trouble. She immediately grabbed me by the back of my shirt and dragged me out of the McDonald's, yelling at me. I explained to her what had happened, and she told me how stupid I was trying anything, and that man was probably mentally ill. Someone came out from the restaurant, found me, and said they calmed the man down and discreetly called the police as not to set the man off again. We waited in the parking lot, and the police showed up shortly after. They detained the man, and as they were bringing him outside to a squad car, the man looked me straight in the eyes, smiled, and screamed, "I'll gut you next time. I swear I'll gut you, pretty boy." So yeah, that'll be the last time I try to intervene again. For a little bit of backstory, I was going to meet up with my friends and future roommates at a realtor office. We had all met about a week previous and already pulled our money together in order to pay for an apartment's rent, a steep $3,500. I was more or less taking the lead on finding and acquiring the apartment therefore I was also delegated to holding everyone's money. I'm a particularly timely person and don't like being anywhere late, so I managed to get to the realtor's office about 30 minutes early. Having missed lunch, I decided to just get a few things from the dollar menu at the McDonald's next door. I walk in, and it's your fundamental McDonald's. A few college kids, a few homeless people, and an older Asian gentleman sitting at a table by himself adjacent the bathroom. I had to go to the bathroom, so I make my way over there and walk into the bathroom to do my thing. It's a one-person bathroom and the door was broken a bit, disabling it from ever being able to fully close. I start to pee when I hear a few footsteps behind me and a weird chuckle. I'm usually not good at stopping my pee mid-pee. This time, however, I was on point. I turn around and see him trying to close the door behind me and clumsily fumble with the standard silver lock that are in those types of bathrooms. My mind, knowing I have $3,500 in my backpack, instantly goes into a fight reaction. I lunge over to him and grab his shoulders, pushing him up against the wall, and only manage to say the words, "No, no, no." While I'm saying these things, he's still smiling and chuckling the whole time, which is the most vivid thing I remember from the endeavor. I then push him out of the way, leave the McDonald's, and go straight to the realtor. It is fully possible that this was a normal guy, expecting it to be a bigger bathroom, and for that I give him the benefit of the doubt. That being said, I'm still morbidly curious what would have happened if I didn't manage to stop peeing halfway through that day, and why he was laughing to himself so creepily. When I was 12, me and my best friend were at the local McDonald's. We were waiting for our food when a guy walks in, probably around 50 to 60 years old. He walks around and doesn't seem to be wanting to order anything. I keep an eye on him because he keeps staring at me and my friend. My friend points that out, and I tell her that I noticed it too. We were both clearly a little creeped out. After about 5 minutes of him walking around, he starts walking towards us. I try to keep a conversation with her to keep us both calm. When he approaches us, he pets the top of my head. I look at my friend and I said, "Was that you?" She shook her head. After we got our food, we went to a booth and sat there and waited for him to leave. He walked towards our booth but kept walking. After we left, she told me something that creeped me out even more. Whenever he touched my head, he looked at her straight in the eye. I didn't tell my parents for about a month after this happened, and needless to say, we never went to that McDonald's again. One of the worst things that's ever happened to me involved a website called Omegle. I was really shy back when I was a junior in high school. I had lots of anxiety and not so many friends. Not through any fault of my own, though. My parents used to move around a lot for work, so every so often, we'd just pick up sticks and move someplace new. This played absolute havoc on my social development for a while, and by the time I joined this new school during my junior year, I not only couldn't find the confidence to speak to people, I just didn't want to either. Like, what was the point when I was probably just going to move somewhere else within 12 months? But saying that, I also craved social interaction. I wanted it so bad, but just had no idea how to get it in any way that didn't turn me into a nervous wreck. And that's when I found Omegle. At first, I only ever used the text option. There was no way I was going to put myself on webcam for some total stranger to see. I talked to random internet people about politics, video games, pretty much anything, and after a while, I really started to feel myself kind of coming out of my shell. And it wasn't just text chatting with people online. The thing that did it was being able to learn to take rejection. Every so often on Omegle, someone would get bored and just ghost me. Maybe they didn't like the conversation, maybe they didn't like me. Whatever it was, they'd just up and disappear. First few times it happened after a decent amount of conversation, it really got to me. Total anonymity brought out some really cruel sides to people, but it somehow also brought out the best in them too. I'd have some real heart-to-hearts with complete and utter strangers, work out complex issues I had with myself, together we'd set the world to rights, and when it was over, poof, gone. I'd never talk to them again. I ended up talking to a handful of girls on Omegle too. At least, they told me they were girls. Either way, I got a flutter of excitement the first few times. A couple of them asked if I wanted to talk dirty, but I ended up leaving those chats on account of just not being proficient in it. Like I wanted to, but I just couldn't. Anyway, I kinda got over the novelty of it after a while. Hearing that someone was female became kind of a non-issue for me. It was pointless trying to practice talking to them online anyway. I knew I'd freeze up if we ever met in person. But it did happen once more for me. That kind of butterflies in your tummy feeling after talking to some random stranger for like an hour and a half one night. We didn't talk about one particular thing. We talked about everything. In this long, rolling, intense conversation that was as intelligent as it was amusing. I was actually pretty sure the person was a guy given some of the hobbies they claimed to have, so you can imagine how surprised I was when they said they were a girl. I was kind of speechless. Only once had I ever gotten the inkling to actually ask someone for their personal contact info so we could keep the conversation going, and that person had ghosted as soon as I asked. I wasn't about to risk any more of my pride like that again, especially when I was certain that this girl in particular would make all the rejection pain come flooding back all anew. So anyways, I find out they're a girl, get excited, but choose to basically ignore it. Not only was I sticking to my never fully believe someone online is a girl until you hear their voice or see a verification picture or video rule, but I really could feel myself getting overly excited that this was actually a girl. Like if it was a girl, then she was like my dream girl, and that wasn't something I thought I could face right then, as weird as that might sound. So I keep the conversation going like it had been, and suddenly I find myself actually kind of flirting. I was probably doing it really bad, but for the first time in my entire teenage years, flirting was something that actually felt sort of natural. The whole thing was going so well that after we happened to both name Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls as our favorite book, I just thought, screw it, and asked if she wanted to talk over webcam. If it was a dude pretending, or she wasn't who she said she was, then fine, I'd cut my losses. But if she was, we tried to line up a little text countdown to us flicking on our webcams, which ended up being goofy and incredibly inaccurate, but it was still kind of cute, and helped me get rid of what little anxiety I had left. And when I saw her, wow, she was gorgeous. Legit one of the prettiest girls I'd ever seen to this day. And after some initial blushing and awkwardness, we carried on our conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her name was Emily, and I've never crushed on a girl as hard as her ever. We spent like another 2 hours just chatting like that, and the whole time I was terrified of getting disconnected or something. But I was still way too scared to ask for like a phone number or email or something, so I was just kind of stuck in limbo like that for a while until I could summon up the courage. She was a senior who lived a few states away, but that didn't bother me, so I tried to push the conversation towards relationships and whatnot, which gave me a way into asking her if she's single. She replies that she is single, but she might not be for long because she met this really cute guy. Obviously, I'm kind of disappointed to hear that, and I tell her I think whoever he is, he's a lucky guy. She starts laughing and says, "I was talking about you, idiot." And I think if I'd blushed any harder, I've gotten a full body pins and needles and everything but my face. By the time I regain my composure, I know the time is right to ask for her number. So I think of a smooth way to ask her, one that's witty but genuine, then work up to nailing the delivery. When I think I see something in the window behind her, only it's light in her bedroom and dark outside, so I can't exactly see what it is. I ask if she lives with her parents. She confirms she does. Then I ask if it's on a ground floor apartment, and she says no, that it was a 2-story and that her bedroom was on the 1st floor. And that's when I start to worry. Because if she lived on the 2nd floor, why did I think I could see what looked like a face just hovering in her window like that? And how do you even tell someone that, oh, we're having this awesome conversation, and I'm just going to be a jerk by telling you there's a face in your window, even though I'm not 100% sure of anything. I carry on staring at the dark shape for a second or two, trying to make sure it's not just my eyes or my monitor playing tricks on me. Emily obviously noticed my change in expression and asked me if everything is okay. I'm like, sure. I just thought I saw something. She turns around, looks blatantly at the window, and then tells me there's nothing there. Probably just a smudge on my monitor or something. I look again. It's just black, so I put it down to all the adrenaline going through me and just assume I made a mistake. The conversation carries on for a while, then the same thing happens. I'm so sure that I see movement in the window behind her that I actually do just sort of snap and say, "Yeah, I think there's something outside your window." She looks outside again, laughs, and says, "Oh, you mean that big branch out there? Yeah, we have a tree in our front yard, and it's windy all the time. It's probably just that." We laugh, and it breaks the tension, but it also sidetracks my move to ask for her number, so I decide to work up to it again. But right when I get there, right when I'm about to be like, "So, what's your phone number?" I see movement yet again, just over her shoulder. Only this time, it's really obviously the window behind her, opening. Like I could see the white bars shifting really slowly behind her, and I knew well that it was no tree branch and that my eyes were definitely not playing tricks on me. That time I wasn't chill or suggestive about it. I just straight up shouted, "Emily, the window!" She then spins around to see exactly what I can see, which is a person wearing dark clothing climbing in through the open window. The webcam on her laptop was super low resolution, so I couldn't see much apart from Emily just disappearing from the camera as she screamed and ran out of the room, only to be followed by this dark figure chasing her at speed. I just had to sit there and listen to the most horrific screaming and shouting sounds I've ever heard. She was home alone at the time, so there was just one set of female screams and occasionally this rough bark of the guy who was chasing her. Then all of a sudden there was a really high-pitched wail before everything went deathly quiet. I grabbed my phone and called 911 frantically, not even thinking that I had absolutely nothing to tell the dispatcher other than, I think I'm witnessing a home invasion." I didn't know where Emily lived other than that she was in New Hampshire. I had no last name, no specifics whatsoever that could actually lead the cops to her location. In the end, I got so frustrated that I hung up. There was nothing I could do. I just stared at the webcam images of her empty bedroom, praying she was okay. I'm not sure how long I was sat there, so I couldn't tell if the cops showed up quickly or not, only that they did show up. I knew because I heard the sirens before I saw the flashing lights from the window of Emily's room. I heard them break into the house. Then I heard them shouting stuff like, "Police, show me your hands," and other garbled stuff. And I actually heard gunshots, maybe 15 to 20 in all. It's hard to say for certain, but it was a lot. I actually stayed on camera until I could get a cop's attention and told them that I'd seen the guy breaking in. This ended up with me getting a call from a New Hampshire detective, but once I told him that I only seen one person break in, and that's all I'd seen via the webcam, he pretty much lost interest. Then I asked if Emily was okay. He sighed, and I could hear him putting on his professional voice before he even really spoke. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this one, kid, but Emily passed away this morning after you two spoke. I'm deeply sorry for your loss, but be safe in the knowledge that any information you give me will go towards catching the guy who did this to her." Not exactly what he said, but you get the idea. I figured it was just a robber, someone who wanted to subdue her before he emptied the house of valuables, but he killed her. The guy did things to her, and then he killed her. He didn't even run once he'd done it either. He stuck around to carry on doing things to her until the cops showed up to shoot him when he must have rushed them or something. Must have had a weapon. For days afterwards, I searched the internet for articles about a New Hampshire murder and home invasion, and God help me, I found one. And that's why I know so much about the details of what had happened, and how this was about 6 or 7 years ago and they still haven't caught the guy who did it. I do have hope, as must her family, because guys are getting caught years later when the cops get a lucky DNA match or something. But given how much I got so attached to Emily in that short period of time, knowing that there was so much special spark between us, and then hearing her final scream, that's been something that's messed with me for years, and I still take anti-anxiety medication all this time later. I think my time using Omegle was like the golden years of my social life, because now I'm back to just not getting close to people. Not because I can't or I don't want to. This time it's because I just don't have it in me to form meaningful attachments. But I know just how easily people can be taken away from us. Y'all remember that thing Omegle? I don't know if it's still as popular as it used to be, or if there's just another version of it that people use, but for those that don't know, it's a website that puts you in a completely random, one-to-one chat room with people, either just text or with webcams too. When I was in my final year of high school, me and my buddies thought it was like the greatest thing ever after we talked 3 rando girls into flashing us one night. So as thirsty as it sounds, that's all we did for like a whole summer. Just chilling in one of our friends' mom's basements and just burning through different people all night. It got to the point where I'd go on Omegle sometimes when I got bored at home. Not to talk to girls as such, just to kind of mess around and see who was online. But I don't go anywhere near that site anymore. Not after seeing the most messed up thing of my life on there. Something that reminded me that the internet is still a pretty dark place sometimes, and that sometimes you can just happen across something seriously messed up, just on accident. So I have my webcam on, and I'm on a roll of just closing chat after chat. Everyone on that night was either a dude playing with themselves, a lonely weirdo, or someone legit mentally deficient, and I was just about to close that browser window out of sheer boredom when I see something that catches my eye. It's a girl, kneeling in a room lit solely with red lights. My first thought is that I might have gotten lucky, and that I was in for a little bit of a show. But then I saw the plastic sheet underneath her. Now, as crazy as it sounds, I had seen something like that before, when this older woman in a mask had a plastic sheet down and was urinating on whatever the stranger in the chat asked them to. Me and the guys had a good laugh at that one, but it was obvious that the idea was to make us laugh at that time, or some other strange interests. But what I ran into that night was most definitely not designed to be humorous. I'm still watching it, wondering who this girl is, why she isn't wearing a mask when she's basically completely uncovered. Whatever was about to happen, though, she sure seemed nervous about it, like she was visibly shaking and trying her best to hide her face, not that she was doing a good job of it. It seems really dumb in retrospect, like the whole thing was giving off the worst vibes, but my dumb horny brain has me still thinking that this is some kind of weird fetish, and for some reason, when this masked dude appears on screen, that just cemented it for me. Some kind of weird BDSM thing was about to go down, and I wasn't mad that I was going to be the rando person to get to watch it. The dude walks up to the girl and puts a black bag over her head. She squirms a little, but other than that, I think she's still just nervous. Or maybe she was acting like that as a show for the audience. I mean, heck, maybe the dude liked her to act like that, who knows? People are weird. The dude then disappears from view before reappearing with a cordless drill. He makes a show of this, having a finger on the tip of the drill like a magician would all, "This is a real blade" type thing, and then walks around the back of the girl and grabs her by the head. Only then do I start to realize that this isn't quite what I thought it was, and that maybe, just maybe, I should close the freaking chat before I see something I end up regretting. But there was something about the whole scene, something about the way the guy was acting and how the girl didn't try to run away. It seemed like a setup, like it was designed to freak someone out. Even the red lights were sus, like I remember reading about how old Italian horror movies would tactically use red lights on set to disguise how terrible their fake blood looked. Something about it meant I couldn't look away. So, I was watching as this hulking, bare-chested dude grabs the girl by the head. She's tiny too, and the size difference means his hand is basically wrapped around her entire skull. He then fires the drill up twice to ensure it's working properly, and that's when the girl really starts to panic. It was also, coincidentally, the moment I started to panic too. Either this girl was doing a very good physical acting job, or her fear was real. And if her fear was real, it meant the whole thing was real too. She starts flailing and struggling so hard that the monster holding her had to lock a knee into the small of her back to keep her still. The way they fell, you could basically only see her head and her legs kicking behind them both. Like I said, I was almost certain the whole thing was fake, but the part that made me really doubt that was what happened to the girl's legs when the guy started to push the whirring, spinning drill into the back of her head. First of all, there was the noise. It was absolutely stomach-churning. The sound of what could easily have been metal on bone just grinding against each other. But that could be faked, right? And there was this horrible mix of screaming and the drill's motor whirring, and the girl grunting as the pain started to hit. But again, could all be acting at the end of the day. What I'm almost certain you can't fake is the way this girl's legs started to spasm when the guy pinning her down started to really push that drill into her brain. They moved in a way that I don't think I've ever seen before, almost like people act in cartoons when they're being electrocuted. I got this sick feeling in my stomach, and I immediately closed the chat window before I saw anything else. The whole thing left me really shaken up. Everyone I've explained what I saw to says they think it was faked too. But then again, I'm almost certain that's because I feed them so much info on how it could have been fake and not really on all the reasons why I think it could have been real. I think I actually just want people to tell me that. Tell me, stop freaking out. You fell for some elaborate prank that'll end up on the internet elsewhere. Because the alternative is just way too messed up for me to quantify, and a part of me still does think that I actually did watch a live snuff film that afternoon. I want to tell you guys that I later heard the cops found a body with a drill hole in the back of the head, or even that I read somewhere that it was just a prank, or even a weird kind of viral marketing campaign or something. But the truth of the matter is, I just don't know. I never heard anyone else talk about the kind of thing I saw on Omegle that day, and I didn't ever go on that site again, so I didn't give myself a chance to catch a repeat performance, so to speak. I just try and tell myself that what I saw wasn't real, and that it was just an elaborate show to scare random internet strangers. That's what keeps the darker thoughts at bay when I'm reminded of it, and that's what helps me get to sleep at night. For a few years there, Omegle and chat roulette were the best things ever. I know it sounds dumb, but the idea of coming face to face with random internet people absolutely terrified me at first. I wasn't the most confident of people when I was younger, and believe it or not, using stuff like Omegle actually helped me come out of my shell a little and learn how to talk to people. And naturally, like anyone who's spent a lot of time on Omegle, I have a lot of stories detailing some of the weirder encounters I've had on there. I mean, I've had some pretty amazing ones. I met one of my long-term gaming buddies on Omegle, and you'd be surprised at the number of girls who just want to show themselves off, so to speak, every once in a while. But I've also had my share of gross, sad, irritating, and downright scary encounters on Omegle too. And what I'm about to tell you is by far the most disturbing. And it's not some dumb creepypasta either. Every word of this is true. So I just gotten home from this terrible part-time job I was working in 2012, and at the time, my routine was get home, sneak one of my stepdad's beers from the garage, and see how palpable the mental illness was on Omegle that afternoon. I was actually having a good run at one point. I had a guy singing that Call Me Maybe song, another dude who did a magic trick, and a handful of pretty girls, and I think one dude was on acid or something. So all in all, I was in a pretty good mood by the time I hit end, and new for what turned out to be the final time of that night. Because when I do, I just see this dude sitting at his desk, staring blankly into the webcam. Immediately this hits me as unusual because most people are looking at their screens to see who you are and not straight up staring into the camera. I said "Hey, what's up?" or something, but the dude didn't reply, so I figured that there was just something wrong with his audio. Now I should add that it was usually around this time that I'd just end a chat and start a new one. If the person on the other end seemed too weird or like they wouldn't be much fun, I'd just skip them entirely. So as you can imagine, coupled with all the other weird stuff you're likely to see during an Omegle session, I ended up doing a lot of skipping. But something about this dude really got my attention. At first, when I saw him, he looked like he might be in his early to mid-teens, dark hair and eyes, kind of a baby face with scrawny shoulders. But the more I looked, the older he seemed to be. The guy had crow's feet, deep bags under his eyes. Pretty sure he had flecks of gray at his temples too. Like if he was as young as I thought he was, then he must have had the most brutal paper route in history. So for some reason, at a time I'd normally just ghost him, I said, Are you okay, dude? Can you hear me?" He nods. He could hear me, and it hit me that this might be another case of someone browsing Omegle while they're high. It might sound a little mean or whatever, but I figured that I'd just mess with him just a little bit. Maybe see if I could guess what kind of drug he was taking. I start talking real slow to him, trying to make him think time is slowing down or something, but he barely reacts. And it's then that I realize that he hasn't looked at his screen or monitor. The whole time he was literally just staring at this little lens on his webcam. I break from the play acting and just ask him straight up, "What kind of stuff are you on, dude?" He just shakes his head. So I ask him if he means he isn't on any drugs at all, and to that he nods. Now I'm torn between laughing because of what could have been a blatant lie and kind of freaking out because if he wasn't lying, and that was him sober, that made for one real creepy guy. And then out of nowhere, this guy reaches up towards his mouth like he's about to take out some gum or something. At first, I think he's going to show me some weird root he's been chewing on that made him look all sleepy. I mean, if there is such a thing, I was just kind of speculating. I know people can get some pretty weird South American plants and stuff from shady websites. But then it becomes obvious that he has hold of his own tooth. His front tooth, I think. Like in the grip of his thumb and forefinger. And then he starts to pull. I respond, "Dude, what are you doing?" All calm at first. And then he starts really getting a grip on his tooth, pulling it and twisting it. And I respond, Stop! What are you thinking, man?" This all escalates until I hear like a deep cracking sound coming from this guy's mic. He twists the tooth free from his gum as blood starts to pour out of his mouth, then holds it up to the camera like he's all proud of himself. I am full-on squealing at the computer at this point, stuck between wanting to cover my eyes and turn it off, and not being able to look away because of what this guy is even doing. I asked him in like 100 different ways, "Why did you do that? Was it rotten? Can't you go to the dentist?" He doesn't say a word. He just spends a few more seconds smiling with this gap-toothed grin, mopping at the blood on his chin and holding up the tooth in front of the webcam. Then he disappears and I'm left on the new chat screen, just shell-shocked. Nothing has ever topped that for me in terms of just pure creepiness. Like I have so many unanswered questions about that guy, and each time I think I get close to figuring it out, it just opens me up to 100 other questions. I mean, he would have had to have been on drugs to be able to pull his own tooth out like that. I don't think anyone could stand the sheer agony. And it's also the whole idea that it wasn't his first time doing it. As crazy as it sounds, he seemed to just know what he was doing. That he had to twist it and wrench it. He knew exactly how to grip it. And then the sense of pride at the end. It all just gave me this distinct feeling that he'd done that kind of thing before. I didn't see anything else that ever made me react so strongly, and after that, all the random guys just sort of playing with their junk that you'd see didn't seem to faze me at all. Like, as long as there wasn't any tooth pulling, it was just water off the duck's back. So, I guess I have something to thank Mr. Toothpuller for, although saying that, it's not something I want to see again. In fact, I hope I never meet Mr. Toothpuller online, or in real life, ever again.
Number 1. Across the Bane. Submitted by Caleb Sharp. Not too long ago did I work at Subway, my first paying job that I would grow to hate. I needed the money though, and the thought of facing customers finally broke me out of my shell. I guess in a way it did. I got the job around late April of 2016. My brother-in-law and sister had been wanting me to get a job so I could break out of my depression and hopefully alleviate some stress. At that time, my grandmother had a vicious stroke, and it was up to me to take care of her. I ended up having to drop out of school, and it made me very homebound, as she could not be by herself too long. At first, I loved it. Everyone was very nice and kind, from customers to the employees. The minimum wage thing didn't bother me too much, as I was happy to be making money for myself for once. All was happy and good until November that year. Around then, I knew what I was doing. The sandwiches, the prepping. I didn't have a problem with that anymore. I'd even made some friends, and I couldn't complain with my job. But every now and then, I would have this regular. Not surprising, as I live in a small college town in the South. He was an athletic man, a toned one, but he had a strong lisp and would often converse with the men on our staff such as I. Personally, I didn't mind him at first. His jokes were okay, I'd guess. But it would seem that he had a deeper reason for making them. Now, I'm pretty dense and have problems picking up on social cues, but after I made his salad and he had left, one of my coworkers pointed out that the guy had been trying to hit on me. I laughed it off, but it kinda dwelled on me, to be honest. Now, don't get me wrong, I didn't dwell on it because I have a problem with gays. I don't. In fact, one of my childhood mentors was obvious with it. He was a man I looked up to, and we shared the same humor. No, this guy, he was weird. As time would go on, I'd realize he was just hitting on me. And eventually, he would start calling the store and would usually request to talk to me. He would start asking me personal questions, like how my day was, if I'd eaten yet. Then he would start asking about my dog. At that point, I was angry. Because how in the world did this stranger know about my dog? When he said that, I kind of broke. I told him to F off, and I told my manager what was up. Luckily, she took my side. She eventually blacklisted his number and had a no-serve order on him. Only a few of the employees even knew about the guy, and they were college kids my age. Usually getting drunk or high and are pretty reclusive, these college kids had no clue, and to this whole situation, they were equally as freaked out as I was. Luckily, we didn't see or hear from this guy again. That is, until he really crossed the line. One night, I was on the closing shift. It had been about 3 months in the freezing season of February. This dude had stopped coming here since around January, and my grandma had passed away recently, so my mind was focused on other stresses. It was really late, and I had skipped my break during a rush and was told to enjoy a 30-minute one before we closed. Not one to argue about a break, I stepped out back for a cigarette with my phone in hand. I'd been reading something my friend wrote for a minute when someone suddenly taps on my shoulder. I hadn't seen anyone out there. I thought I was alone. So when I felt that tapping, I jumped back and nearly crapped myself in the process. And when I saw who it was, I was far from relieved. It's the same guy, standing there in some tracksuit. I called him out, telling him he's not supposed to be here. He laughed this condescending laugh for a second, then asked me about my nieces. Now, I live with my brother and sister, and I'm a very active uncle in their lives. They often see me as their older brother at times. When he mentioned them, my blood began to boil. He then asked me simply to hand over my phone and wallet. I refused, and more so, I told him to remove himself from the premises before I did it for him. Just then, the guy reaches into his track pants and pulls out a freaking crowbar. What went through my mind at first was to allow him to get the first hit, so I could hopefully dodge it or grab the weapon. But all in all, I wish he just wasn't there. Before this guy could make another move or attack me, whatever he was going to do, I noticed that my brother was sitting outside of his car. Now, my brother is no army guy or cop. He is a hard-working man and a determined hiker, and wherever he goes, he carries his 5.5-foot walking stick with him. He's kind of self-trained for self-defense. I mean, all you gotta do is whack him hard with the walking stick, right? Well, I stepped out slowly onto the parking lot with my hands up, and this guy was not far behind me. I looked towards my brother with an expression of distress, and that's when he noticed the guy. Getting out of his car, my brother grabs his stick, yelling while also beating it on the building wall, grabbing the man's attention. I honestly didn't know what he was going to do when he saw that. Would he realize that a crowbar might beat some walking stick and escalate things? Or would he simply give up? Well, when he saw my brother, he turned tail and ran away, and I let out a sigh of relief. Honestly, I didn't know what that guy was going to do. When we went back inside, I told my boss what happened, but she didn't seem to take it too seriously, or so I thought. Because about a week later, some of our usual boys in blue came in. We put on our gloves to make them a sandwich, but they told us that they weren't there for the sandwiches. Just to pass on the info to our boss that they caught the trespasser with 20 pills of stolen Xanax. I caught on quickly and agreed to pass it on, knowing the guy they meant was the one that attempted to attack me. It's been 3 months, and I've quit for reasons that were unrelated, but after contemplating the situation, I realized that I usually stand at the edge of the outside wall behind the store, making it pretty easy for anyone to just stand behind the corner unseen and watch me as I'm oblivious taking my break. Number 2. Closing shift at Subway. Submitted by Donutio. I'm 20 years old and I live in Canada. This story took place during the 2016 clown craze in October, about 10 to 20 minutes before my Subway store was going to close. To make things a little easier to understand, I've got to give a brief explanation of the layout of our store. So there's the front door that customers walk through, which is completely made of glass. Then there's the windows to the left, if you're standing behind the counter facing the front. The bathroom is beside the swinging door that employees use to get to the sandwich unit. This all began while I was finishing doing dishes in the back room. I was the only person there because they rarely had more than one employee for the closing shift, unless of course it was for training purposes. Really, only one employee is needed, even though it might not be a smart decision. There hadn't been any customers for a while, and I really had to go to the bathroom, so I started making my way to the swinging door by the sandwich unit, when all of a sudden I heard the bell ding at the front door, indicating that a customer had entered. I was honestly a bit annoyed because I'd been putting off going to the bathroom for a long time, and obviously I can't leave someone unattended in the front store. Before I even turned around to take the person's order, and I know it's going to sound odd, but I heard the generic sound of a clown's nose honking. It sent shivers and goosebumps through my entire body. As I hesitantly turned around to confirm what I had just heard, there was someone standing at the door with a bright orange afro and white face paint. Beyond that, they were dressed extremely casually, though in a plain green zip-up hoodie and black jeans, which almost made it creepier. They stared at me and smiled from ear to ear. Before I could even think of doing anything, They gave me a sinister little wave before quickly running out of the store and around the left side window. I was frozen in place. I was wondering, was this really happening? Or better yet, why was this happening? I didn't know the clown craze reached my small town. I just stared at the window for what felt like 10 minutes. Once I came to, I ran to the front door and just locked it. There was no way I was letting anyone in, even if we weren't closed yet. But before I did, I poked my head around the corner to make sure that lunatic was gone for sure. Well, I didn't see anything. He was gone, I thought. I couldn't see him anywhere. The parking lot was empty save for my car. So I went back in the store and locked the doors, counting the seconds until the actual closing time was here. But not 10 minutes until closing. A couple of cops were knocking at the door. I was nervous, yet relieved to see them. I immediately unlocked the doors and let them inside. Apparently, they were there to just ask me a few questions. They wanted to know if I had seen someone dressed with an orange afro and white makeup. Yeah, I was excited to tell them that some creep was out there so that they could catch this guy. Well, they explained that someone called not too long ago, saying that they drove by and saw someone matching that description in the subway parking lot, kneeling behind a green sedan. They were holding a carving knife. My heart seemed to stop. That was my car. This psycho was waiting for me behind my car. If the cops hadn't scared him away by showing up, he'd still be out there. What would have happened if I walked out there alone at closing time? I was scared more than I'd ever been, but the cops offered to walk me to my car and even check it if I needed them to. I happily obliged. Then I got out of there and stayed the night with a family member nearby, because after that horrific experience, I couldn't be alone. The clown craze was always hilarious in my eyes until something actually happened to me. There was just something horrifying about the contrast of the clown hair and makeup, along with normal everyday clothing. Better yet, what would have happened if I was already in the bathroom, defenseless and unaware? I'm so thankful I held it for as long as I did, and that some stranger drove by and saw this weirdo. I'm happy that I didn't find out what this lunatic was capable of. You can bet I don't work the closing shift at Subway anymore. Number 3. Subway Spooks. Submitted by Michael T. Back when I was just out of college, me and a friend of mine, let's call him James, decided to eat at a Subway. After all, it wasn't far from James' little apartment he lived at. When we arrived, I could already feel this weird vibe of the place. This was a little normal, since James lives in a poor, run-down part of the city, so I normally felt like this when I drived around this area. Well, we went inside the Subway and it was pretty normal. I ended up getting a tuna and James got a steak and cheese. And all of a sudden, this guy walks in. He was really pale and skinny and was wearing a dirty wife beater with ripped track pants. He was balding and looked to be around 40 or 50 years old. He came up to the man working behind the counter, then just stood there staring right at him, doing literally nothing, just staring. Me and James were a little freaked out about this, and we felt a little bad for the guy working behind the counter, but we tried to ignore him while we ate our sandwiches. It was none of our businesses at the time. Around 1 minute later, the men working the counter decided to try and get the man out, since the guy was obviously not there for an order. Besides, the place didn't have much of security, no guards or cameras, so someone this sketchy could have been a liability. The guy came around the side when the creepy man suddenly ran out of the store. I mean, he bolted. But as he ran out, he passed us, and he locked eyes with me. It gave me a very nervous feeling. I just wanted to blend in with the background and enjoy my sandwich. But there this weird guy was, making a scene and looking right at me as he ran past and exited the store. He managed to get out of the store without a hassle. Though he looked at me as he exited, he never even looked in front of him, yet He didn't trip or run into anything. This guy was some kind of freak. 5 minutes later, we heard a car alarm go off really nearby, and maybe 10 seconds later, I realized what was happening. I saw lights coming from the window exactly where I parked my car. It wasn't that great of a car, but it's all I could afford at the time. So I ran out of the store along with James, and we were honestly about to beat the crap out of the person who was trying to break in our car. But when we got outside, nobody was there at my car. So we decided to call it a night before anything else crazy happened. We hopped in my car, not even finishing our food. We didn't even want to at that point, and we were about to drive off. But the moment the car started and the headlights turned on, we saw him. The creepy guy from the subway was in front of our car now. I had no idea where he'd been hiding before, but I swear to God we didn't see him. He was about to jump on the hood of my car. He must have been some junkie or something, since he didn't jump until we backed out. We sped off on the way to James's place, until he said he didn't want to go home. He lived too close to the subway, and the last thing he wanted was that guy to see where he lives. I couldn't say I blamed James. I think I would have done the same thing, but it was weird coming from James because he was the bravest person I knew. So I told him that he could stay at my place, then we went home. Honestly, that was the last I saw of this creepy subway guy. I don't know what was wrong with him, and I've never seen him again, but probably because of him, I'll never be going back to Subway, at least not that one. One scary day, my mom and I went to Subway for a quick snack. When we reached our destination, we got out of the car and went inside. Inside, I sat at a table near the only window there. I'd always liked the window seats. My mom was ordering, and I was just watching like the little stalker I was. But as I watched my mother deal with the cashier, the situation seemed to get weird. I could hear them talking from where I was, when I suddenly heard the words sex and children. I was starting to get nervous, so I went up to the counter and rested my arm on my mom's head. I'm a lot taller than my mom. The cashier looks at me with an angered look and says, "Who the F are you?" I hadn't even said or done anything, and he's treating me like that. I'd gone to anger classes before, and I did pretty well. But even still, it took everything I had just to say, "I'm her son." Why? I wanted to say so much more to someone that rude. The cashier was wide-eyed. "He's your son?" My mother said yes. Then the cashier pretended that nothing happened, even though I wanted to snap his freaking neck. My mom saw my anger and said to calm down. I just didn't know why this guy was being so disrespectful. The cashier is staring at something under the table, and I look suspiciously at him and look over the table. The cashier noticed me looking at him, so he lifted his head up fast, like he was looking at something in secret. I was still trying very much to fight the anger from this rude person. I don't know what he and my mom had been talking about, but he still had no reason to treat us like he did. Suddenly, and I still have no idea what set this guy off, maybe he was crazy, he pulls out a pistol that he had apparently taped under the counter, and he began to point it at the two of us. And when he did, I let anger take over me, and I jumped over the counter and began fighting with this guy. I felt like if I didn't, someone was going to get hurt, and I wasn't going to give up until that gun was out of his hand. Taking quick glances to check on my mother, she seemed extremely surprised, and she was still like a statue. As I'm struggling with the cashier, he whips the arm holding the gun toward my head, and I flinch and feel something smash into me. It hurts, but I don't stop fighting with this man. My mom at this point was running out of the store, and before I knew it, I feel another crushing thud against the back of my head, and then everything slowly got dark. I came to in a hospital bed. Confused, I got up, but at that moment, the only thing I felt was pain. I dropped myself back onto the bed. A doctor walked in and said that I had a concussion. He told me not to worry, that I'd be fine within about a month. All I have to say is that I'm glad I didn't get shot. We are, along with several others, pressing charges against this freak. Apparently, the guy just snapped, and no one knew he had been hiding a weapon in the store. Number 5. Subway Watcher. Submitted by Orion. I'm here to share with you a really strange story. This is not my own experience, it's my friend's story. And let's call him James. James has been working at a Subway for a year, and he really hates his job, but it pays pretty good. Well, on February 11th of 2016, he almost quit, because he was just having a regular day until this one customer comes in. It's a big guy, very rough looking. He welcomes the guy, saying that he'd be with him in a moment because he had to finish up another order. Eventually, they get to his order, and James rings him up at the register. Once everything is done, he hands the guy his sandwich bag. But the guy doesn't move. He doesn't try to take the sandwich. He tries to get the man's attention. Maybe he just zoned out for a second. But the guy completely stops. He doesn't blink. He's just staring straight ahead into nothingness. James was wondering what happened, because it looked like the guy glitched, as if he was an android that stopped working. James even clapped his hands in front of the man to see if he would blink, but he didn't. He didn't react to anything. Freaking out, James runs to his manager to see what needed to be done. Maybe this guy had a health condition. Maybe they needed to call an ambulance. For all James knew, he was having a strange seizure or something. But as he and the manager approach the front of the store, the man isn't there, and the sandwich bag is still on the counter. The manager is annoyed, thinking that James made this up to freak him out. But James is serious, so he talks the manager into showing him the tapes to prove his point about how weird this guy was. They go together since the store was closed to check the security footage. And get this, the guy never shows up on the tapes. James was dumbfounded when he saw it, because there was James making the sandwich for no one. Now, my friend may be a stoner every other weekend when he can, but he's definitely never been known to hallucinate. He still doesn't know what happened that day.
In January of 1992, Kelly Day Wilson was just a 17-year-old senior at Gilmer High School. With her well-coiffed curly blonde hair and extravagant jewelry choices and bright blue eyes, Kelly Day was a pretty picture, and had no problem making friends after she relocated from Natchitoches, Louisiana to Gilmer, Texas, so she could live with her mother and stepfather. She hit the ground running and struck up an on-again, off-again relationship with a young man by the name of Chris Denton, and the two spent a great deal of time together in the lead-up to the new year. It seems Kelly's life was going swimmingly well, and it's clear that no one could have possibly expected what fate had in store for her, something that would raise questions among true crime enthusiasts that pervade even today. On January 5th, 1992, Kelly finished her shift at the Gilmer Square outlet of Northeast Texas Video, closing the store at around 8:30 p.m. before heading over to a local bank to deposit the store's daily takings. This particular bank branch's security cameras showed that an individual did indeed make the night deposit for that evening, but the captured footage didn't provide a clear enough image of the person for a positive identification of Kelly, simply showing an arm in her car. We can presume it was her, but we can't be 100% certain. After locking down the store's shutters with her manager, Joe, he wished Kelly good night before driving away in his truck. The last he ever saw of her, she was last seen wearing cut-off stone-washed jeans, a purple rugby shirt with gold trim, and brown loafers, and was getting into her car in preparation for her night drive to the bank. But Kelly didn't arrive home that night, nor did she check in with any of her friends. Her mother became so worried that she sent her stepfather out into the night to aid in the police search that ensued. And like grim providence, it was him that found Kelly's abandoned car in the Northeast Texas Video parking lot at around 5 a.m. The car was sporting a single slash tire, and all of Kelly's personal belongings, including her purse, were inside of her car. Only she and her keys were missing. At first glance, what happened appeared to be a complete mystery, but it was one that local law enforcement was determined to get to the bottom of. For 2 years, The investigation into Kelly's disappearance was headed up by a Sergeant James Brown. One of the first people investigated was obviously Joe, her manager, and the last person to see her alive. However, not only did Joe have multiple alibis, he passed several lie detector tests issued by the police, and as a result, he was rolled out as a suspect. Sergeant Brown oversaw a team consisting of hundreds of police officers and local volunteers, one of which poured thousands of man-hours into an intensive search of the surrounding area. Yet despite such a thorough search, as well as hundreds of tips from the general public, not a single trace of Kelly was ever found. Police believed that they were close when they arrested 17-year-old Michael Bibby, who was taken into custody on misdemeanor charges in an incident of alleged tire slashing. Michael was guilty of many, many things, but as police discovered, slashing Kelly's tires wasn't one of them, and in the end, he too was ruled as a suspect in Kelly's disappearance. Investigators then turned their gaze to another suspect, Kelly's on and off again boyfriend, Chris Denton. The couple were said to have been going through a rough patch at the time of her disappearance, and with people saying that Chris had something of a short temper, there was a period where he became the case's prime suspect. However, through the course of the investigation, circumstantial evidence would clear him of all wrongdoing, and the police would be forced to look elsewhere for their abductor. Unbelievably, in a number of interviews conducted in the process of their investigation, police had heard a handful of stories alluding to a satanic cult that called Gilmer home. But since the accusations named members of law enforcement as members of the cult, specifically Sergeant James Brown himself, the claims weren't taken seriously by those that heard them. Yet, in 1994, the local community was rocked by almost 50 indictments against 10 different people, all on charges of child abuse. And given some of the evidence presented against them, police proceeded with charges of aggravated assault, aggravated kidnapping, and capital murder in connection with Kelly Day Wilson's disappearance. It's at this point that Kelly's story seems to intersect with that of the Kerr family, because in 1990, a man named Wendell Kerr told his wife, Loretta, that he wanted a divorce, kicking off a chain of events that would bring prosecutors their one best chance at finding the perpetrator. Wendell Kerr was one of 6 adult children of Eugene and Geneva Kerr, a couple who were briefly married in the 1950s before a hastily divorce. Geneva Kerr went on to marry 2 other men, both of whom died before Geneva remarried Eugene, making him both her first and her 4th husband. According to their children, Eugene and Geneva Kerr abused their children on a daily basis. A relative later confirmed their claims of carnal abuse and spoke of witnessing daily incidents of indecent assault. This same relative also confirmed that they'd witnessed Geneva Kerr's interest in satanic practices, including daily readings from the Satanic Bible and an interest in both animal and human sacrifices. In exchange for law enforcement's help escaping the Kerr family, one of their grown-up son's wives offered to tell investigators everything. She claimed she was kept as a slave to the family for 10 years, couldn't drive a car, constantly threatened by Geneva and Danny, and her only form of identification, her birth certificate, was kept by Danny in his wallet. In her own horrifying words, her role was simply as a breeder. Cut back to Wendell asking his wife for a divorce. Loretta strongly began to suspect that Wendell was trying to ditch her for a younger woman, and if that was the case, she was going to burn his entire life down before she left. She went to the police with accusations, and as a result, Wendell was arrested, placed on the offenders register, and forced to serve out a period of probation. A state welfare worker assigned to the case later concluded that ritualistic, satanic abuse was endemic in all branches of the Kerr family, and over the next several years, almost a dozen of the clan's children were taken into the care of Child Protective Services. The social worker also mentioned in a horrifying affidavit that in October of 1992, 2 of the children took us to show us where the devil meet people to abuse and hurt babies. In 1994, the escaped Kerr wife was interviewed by the Harrison County Jail in Marshall, Texas, in which she described in gruesome detail the torture that Kelly Wilson would receive for approximately 9 days before she was ritually sacrificed and then cannibalized. She described Geneva as the leader and said that several of the Kerr clan, along with Sergeant James Brown, were all present during these events. Connie Martin and Wanda Kerr both had stated in interviews that Kelly Wilson was a birthday present for Geneva Kerr, and that the matriarch reveled in the poor girl's torment. Yet in light of the accusations, it came to light that information was allegedly coerced from the Kerr children, as well as some of those indicted in the disappearance. Some of the children were allegedly programmed to tell the stories the investigators wanted, while the prosecution tried to coerce a confession by offering life in prison in opposition to the death penalty as long as they confessed to the killing, best summarized in a quote from a state official that reads, "Investigators working on little more than hearsay have created a mythology about a satanic cult, leading to what some describe as a modern witch hunt. They indicted a whole family and even a police investigator, destroying his law enforcement career, straining his marriage and prompting death threats. The Texas Attorney General, finding no evidence any of the charges were true, instead uncovered suggestions that the whole cult theory was the product of coercion by overzealous investigators, even to the point that they physically restrained children to elicit allegations of satanic activity." Ultimately, the Attorney General's office were forced to dismiss every single one of the charges alleging satanic abuse and sacrificial murder. The satanic cult was found to be a complete fabrication, nothing more than a fantasy concocted by the Kerr children under the influence of police investigators. Chris Denton, Kelly's old boyfriend, tragically died of cancer in 2004, but there were rumors that he had made a deathbed confession. But close family dismissed these allegations as thoughtless, malicious hearsay and maintain Chris's innocence to this day. Joe Henry, the owner and manager of the Northeast Texas Video and the last person to see Kelly before she vanished, stayed mostly under the radar for a number of years. But in a despicable twist in the story, Joe was arrested on charges of possessing indecent images of children. However, police have emphasized that in spite of the nature of the charges against him, he had never been considered a serious suspect in Kelly's case. For all the twists and turns, trials and confessions, finger-pointing, and numerous suspects, Kelly Wilson has never been found, despite 20 years of searching. She is presumed dead, but a body has never been found and no valid charges have ever been made in connection with the case. Without a body or Audrey's Jeep being recovered, there's simply no way of coming up with any definitive explanation as to why she disappeared. There must be a rational explanation as to why she vanished, but given the circumstances, for all intents and purposes, Audrey and her vehicle basically dropped off the face of the earth, never to be seen again.
So this happened about a week ago around the same time, 2 a.m. Just a bit of background. I live in the UK and go to uni. I live in a fairly typical student house, though in a bad area. Anyway, it's the Easter holidays here and we get 2 weeks off. There's 7 of us in the house usually, but everyone's gone home for the holidays. I don't have a lot of family and I have a ridiculous amount of work to do, so I decided to stay here for Easter. Now I don't care when I say this, but I hate being alone. Every little fucking noise at night still freaks me out, and I'm 22 fucking years old. Anyway, yesterday I set up camp in the living room, doing some work with headphones in. There's a door from the living room that leads to the backyard, really small yard with another door leading to a small alley. I go out for a smoke down the alley, which is creepy as fuck. I get back, but do you know that feeling of something's wrong here? I felt it. I was thinking I was just being paranoid, so I walked into the kitchen, got a drink. Then I definitely heard a fucking noise. I grab a knife out of the drawer. There's a fucking shadow near the empty space where the old washing machine was. I fucking nearly pissed myself. I don't know what to do. Don't know why I did, but I threw some kitchen towel at him. He fucking screamed, banged his head on the wood. I was standing there with a knife and this guy looked at me dead in the eyes. He had some crazy contact lenses in, like blood red ones. Just fucking made the situation even more terrifying. I just said, get the fuck out or I'll call the police, as I'm sitting there shaking with my knife in hand. He ran out through the door, into the alleyway and fucked off. I rang the police and told them about what had happened. Completely forgot about the washing machine space. showed the police where he came in. There was a fucking bag with 3 knives, lighter fluid, and matches. Honestly, I have no idea what he intended to do, but I'm glad he didn't get the chance. I hadn't thought about this for a while until just now when an animal charity put an alert out on Facebook. So April last year, I had thought about getting 2 rabbits to accompany my other 2. The 2 I had already were neutered females, so I was looking for neutered males, the rabbit's social hierarchy, lifelong buddies, etc. I was looking on Gumtree for an exercise pen to attach to the one we had already so that, if we did get more bunnies, once bounded there'd be a bigger space for them when they weren't out during the day. So I found an advert for one, clicked it, and saw the owner was also putting her rabbits up for adoption. It had been one of those dumb things. Her kid daughter had been excited for Easter, Mom bought her some rabbits. Rabbits didn't want to be picked up. Kid made them nervous, eventually becomes bored of them because they're not like toy rabbits. It's an unfortunate common story. Anyway, I called him up, asked about the exercise pen and the rabbits, and we arranged to meet the next day when the seller's able to arrange to take the morning off work. The next day, she met me off the train in her town. More like a village, really. It was relatively small, and we walked to her house. She was a really nice lady, and she had a Belfast accent. This is all happening just outside of Glasgow, by the way, and as an English immigrant to Scotland, it was just nice to hear a different accent. On the way, she started telling me about after I had called her. Her phone had said she had 15 missed calls. About a minute after we'd arranged to meet, her phone rang again, and a man with a thick Irish traveler accent had started talking about getting the rabbits from her without even saying hello. When he'd taken a minute to breathe, she explained that she already had someone coming to see them, and that if it didn't work out, she'd let them know. He sounded angry when she'd said that, and sworn before he hung up on her. Anyway, we get to her house. The exercise pen is exactly what I want, and then I meet the bunnies and fall in love with them. She asked me if I'd like to give them a new home, and I agree. Not just because of how lovely and sociable they were with me within a few minutes of meeting them, but because they were a bounded pair, and I couldn't stand the thought of them being separated at a shelter. I mean, it was just after Easter, and then in Christmas are the worst time for spaces and shelters. Because I was also taking the rabbits back with me, she was kind enough to drive me back to my flat with everything. Later on that day, around 6 p.m., I get a call from her. When she had dropped off me and the rabbits back at my flat, she had gone straight to work. When she had gotten home, she found her daughter being comforted by the babysitter. She thought she was probably just upset that the rabbits had gone. But no. Her daughter had answered a knock at the door while the babysitter was making dinner. A big guy in scruffy clothes had looked down at her and grinned and asked if she had any rabbits. She said she did have, but they moved house today and the guy's smile turned angry. He started shouting and he pounded his fist at the door, and that's when the babysitter came running. The babysitter said there was a white transit van parked outside and there were 2 other guys in there. The man's accent was Irish and distinctively traveler. Turns out that when she posted the ad for the exercise pen, it had been from her phone, and Gumtree automatically added her street location on the little map thing next to the username. She had posted a separate ad for the rabbits in the pets for sale section, which I hadn't seen, and that's how they'd found the house. It's a small street in a suburb, so even with the map location, it wasn't a very long street, and they could have easily knocked on the other 5 or 6 doors on the street. The babysitter had called the police after she forced the door shut. These guys are apparently always being spotted in small newsagents calling people about dogs for sale. They've been arrested before for organizing dog fights and stealing dogs and rabbits for people's gardens. It was only when I saw a charity on Facebook send out an alert about some Irish chaps in a corner shop holding the classifieds open and ringing about a dog near Perth that I remembered. I guess they move around a lot. Perth's quite far from Glasgow. To think there are such greedy, heartless people driving around, stealing and buying dogs to fight, and taking rabbits to give the dogs a taste for blood for the fight, to the point of shouting at a kid because they have no bait for their dogs on one of the most peaceful holidays of the year. That is creepy as hell. This was about 8 or 10 years ago, but it's the only post-worthy thing I can think of that ever happened to me. Growing up, my family wasn't exactly middle class. We lived in a shitty trailer. The area we lived in looked alright. The yards were mowed and everything was taken care of. But anyways, it was about a week or two before Easter, and I fell asleep watching television. I woke up a couple of hours later, probably around 1 or 2 a.m., and the front door was open. I figured my stepdad had stepped outside for a smoke and just forgot to close the door when he came back in. So I went ahead and closed it and went back to the couch and went back to bed without thinking anything about it. Looking back now, I feel like an idiot for not locking the door. I was awoken again about an hour later to a lot of yelling, and it was my stepdad going off. In the entire time I've known him, I've never heard him yell or anything till this night, and I haven't since. But someone had just walked into our house off the street and had been staring at me while I was sleeping, according to what my stepdad told me. From what I saw, he was fairly skinny and had long hair. He chased the guy out, and to this day, we still have no idea who it was. All I know is about 5 months after this incident, one of our neighbors got busted for having a meth lab in their basement. But still, ever since this happened, I don't go to sleep without locking my door or setting the alarm I have installed in the house I am currently in. This past Easter, my dad, a pilot for a cargo shipping company, was in town and offered to take me across the inlet for a nice dinner. As his co-pilots were away from their families, they were also invited to join, and gladly did. While I waited for them to validate their tickets in the ferry terminal, I spotted an unlikely duo standing by the door. 2 guys, late 20s at most, one large and oafish, the other shorter and movie star gorgeous. I looked just in time to see Oaf nod in my direction, and movie star make a face that can only be described as, meh, I'd fuck her after a few beers. They stood close to us in the terminal. Keep in mind, this ferry carries hundreds of people at a time, and I told my dad about the nod. He laughed and continued talking to his co-pilots next to us. Every time I looked over, movie star was already looking at me. I shook my head. We sat on opposite ends of the ferry. Oaf and movie star debarked before us. I was glad they were gone. We walked up the street from the terminal to the restaurant, and when I turned back to take in the view of the city across the water, was surprised to find the duo had somehow ended up behind us and were slowly walking up the street. I didn't think much on it. It was a busy area and lots of pubs were around. I did think about it more when they walked by the restaurant, peering intently into the front window where we were standing waiting for a table. They smiled, exchanged words with each other, and kept moving. I let out a sigh of relief until they walked back by from the opposite direction. They stopped. They leaned on a bike rack in front of the restaurant a few more times and left. Movie star stared over his shoulder the whole time. Over dinner, I informed my father and his co-pilots of the events that transpired without them even realizing. They laughed about it and eventually had me laughing about it too. We'd never seen the pair of guys again. 3 hours later, as we waited for the return ferry, I was talking to our company, recounting a story from earlier at dinner, when I spotted Oaf and movie star over my dad's shoulder. Movie star was looking my way. Scratch that. Staring. I quickly informed the guys. They were shocked and kept looking back at the pair. There was a miniature showdown in the ferry terminal as each party stared each other down from opposite ends. As the ferry returned, the men were apprehended by security and taken away in handcuffs by local authorities. When we asked around, apparently the men were spotted pickpocketing multiple people throughout the night. Thank God I kept my eyes on them. because I knew for a fact they had their thieving eyes on us. We were relatively new to the neighborhood at this time, having only lived there for a few months. We were getting to know people on the street, but we weren't super close with any particular family. I was 12 or so at the time, and my brother was 4. Now this happened on early Easter Sunday morning. This is important. My room had a huge window right next to my bed, so my dog loved sleeping with me. He was a very docile dog, rarely ever barking or making a fuss. I woke up that morning very early in the morning to him growling. I looked out the window and didn't see anything, so I assumed all was well and tried to go back to sleep. My dog, however, kept growling louder until he was finally barking like a maniac. That's when I realized there were 2 men in my driveway, climbing up the front stairs to our doorway wearing all black. My father came barreling into my room and screamed at these guys through my window to get the fuck off his property, and asking them who the fuck they thought they were creeping around our house so early in the morning. One of them responded, and my dad couldn't really hear them. He yelled at them again, and finally he understood what he was saying.
"It's Sam and Joe! We're being the Easter Bunny!"
Sam and Joe were a father and son from down the street who liked to put flower bunny prints on people's driveways and front walks, leading up to a basket of candy at the doorway for any children in the home. They didn't inform us that they were going to be skulking around our house early in the morning, which thus led to my dog flipping out. They did it every year I lived there, although I think they stopped once my brother turned 13. They are a really great family, and my dog never barked again. Just, holy hell, a little forewarning would have been nice. I'm a 26-year-old girl that lives alone in a basement apartment with my dog. Last Easter, my dog was only about 3 months old at the time. I took her out to do her thing before going to bed. This was around 1:30 a.m. We went to the yard. Pitch black. Streetlights are kind of far away, so the only light out was from people's windows. She's doing her thing, and I'm talking to her. I look up and look into my neighbor's yard. No fence, just 2 medium-sized trees are between our yards. And I see this tall man. I'm guessing around 2 meters tall. The guy is around 3 to 4 meters away from me and just stands there and stares. All of a sudden, he starts walking from the yard towards the street. I do the same. My front door was open, didn't want to risk anything. When I come to my door, I see the guy. He stands in front of my neighbor's house and he just stares back. I stood there for about 2 minutes, just trying to see what the fuck he was doing. Then he starts walking up the stairs of the house, and it looks like he's going in. At that point, I decide that I just have a creepy neighbor and go into my apartment. I sit down on the couch and continue watching television. Then I start seeing someone blocking a beam of light that comes in through my curtains. And again, it gets blocked. It was like someone was walking in my yard. I mute the TV, but hear nothing. The weather was very cold, so the grass was crispy. I stand up and lift my curtains up. Note that I live in a basement. And there he is. Our faces couldn't have been more than a foot away from each other, on opposite sides of the window. I managed to keep my cool and stared back. The guy just stood up and walked slowly away in the crispy grass and went back into my neighbor's yard. I eventually freaked out and called the cops. And now, maybe 1 month ago, I'm watching TV with the dog. All of a sudden, she starts growling. Hairs on the back go up and teeth showing. There he was again. Same window. I called the police again, but there's very little they could do besides talking to him. Now, I always have the curtains down. I have a security system and always take a flashlight with me to the yard if it's dark. I had just gotten out of a really shitty relationship with a guy I had been living with for 3 years. He was a really pretty boy who looked like Johnny Depp, but he liked to steal all my money while I was at work and throw crazy parties. I got tired of his stealing and coming home to emo kids asleep all over my house, so I left him. I didn't want anything but my stuff, and I let him keep the house and cars I bought him. I just wanted my sanity back. I moved back in with my granny. I'm her favorite grandchild, and she's spoiled me as she does. I had recently reconnected with my best friend that I had known since kindergarten, Chris. I was hanging out with Chris on my back porch one morning when the subject of boys gets brought up. Chris is gay, and we often talk about boys together. He asked if I was seeing anybody, and I tell him that I'm not. It had only been a few months since I left the money leech, and I didn't think I was ready to trust anyone. Chris said that he knew the perfect man for me. I said that I don't think there is such a thing. He begs me to go meet this guy. I reluctantly sigh and tell my granny that I'm going on an adventure with Chris. We talked as we drove, and he tells me that this guy has been in love with me since we were kids. He told me it was this little boy, Quinn, that used to follow me around. I told him that I thought Quinn was a lot younger than us. He told me that Quinn is just short like me. He called Quinn and told me to talk to him. I do, and he seems really sweet, but a little airheaded. We show up at his house, and he's really pretty. He was also very sweet, has a good job, his own car, and owns his own company. We start hanging out a lot and eventually started dating. He buys me presents like nice jewelry and Prada sunglasses. He told me his girl only deserved the best. I told him I couldn't accept all these gifts, but he would just dump them in my car or purse when I wasn't looking, so I just learned to take them. He wanted to always call me and talk for hours, and wanted me to call when I got home from his house. I thought he was sweet and just wanted to be sure I got home safely. The reality set in rather quickly. He introduced me to his entire family within a couple of days of us dating. I usually don't introduce guys to my family until we're serious, but whatever. Upon meeting his mother, I learned that it's her house and he lives there with her. I also learned that he has no job other than doing odd jobs for his dad. I was speechless. He also lied about being my age. I was 24 at the time, and he had just turned 18 like the day or so before we started dating. I was so upset I didn't know how to feel. He begs me not to leave him and to take him to my play rehearsal the next day. He showed up in my driveway just as I was leaving for the theater. Chris drove him there and tells me we need to sort our shit out. He said if Quinn was gay, he would be all over him, not to leave him over a few small lies. The whole drive is awkward. I don't want to talk to this guy. I want him gone, I'm thinking in my mind. He pulls out a diamond ring and tries to propose to me. I tell him no, but he slides the rock on my finger anyway. He tells me I need to just think about it. I go to the theater and shit just goes downhill from there. He embarrassed me in front of my friends with his ignorance and childness, and threw a bitch fit because my other best friend, Mikey, gave me a piggyback ride. He storms out, and then his mother started calling to check up on him. I decided right then and there it was done. After rehearsal, I got a friend to go with me to drive him home. I tried to give his ring back, but he wouldn't take it. I leave and go to a bar with my fellow actors. I told him that was why I had to take him home so early. Driving back, I see flashing lights in my rearview mirror and hear yelling. Chris and Quinn are following me. I pull into the bar and Chris throws Quinn and myself at each other and yells that we need to talk. I break up with Quinn right then and there. As he starts throwing a bitch fit, I walk into the bar with my friend. I spend the night at Mikey's for a few days. When I return home, I have tons of harassing phone calls. He called me and my grandparents every few hours. He even had Chris help. Everywhere I went, he was there. He stalked me at home, made me run from a theater during a movie, and followed my car. Chris helped him do all of this as well. He even pulled a gun on my family while we were outside during Easter. I was helping the little kids hunt eggs. He cruised by several times and then pulled his gun. He creeped by with his gun and pointed it directly at us. I was terrified, and I had no idea what to think. I filed a restraining order that day. I moved in with Mikey so he would leave my grandparents alone. I went nowhere without at least 2 guys with me at all times. I thought at any minute he would come and kill me. I felt hunted like a deer in the woods. But I was lucky though. I come to find out, he shot up the car of his next girlfriend while her 2-year-old was inside. Damn, was I lucky.
Christmas of 2016 was the most horrifying and worst day of my life. My cousin was hosting a huge house party, really a Christmas party to celebrate the holiday on Christmas Eve. All of his friends, some of my friends, and almost the whole family were there. It was the biggest and most insane party I've ever seen. We were all above 21, with the exception of a few kids, so a lot of us were just drinking our asses off and becoming more drunk. There were so many of us just yelling and constantly crashing into things, and others were already passed out on the couches. I went upstairs to play video games with some of my friends, and then I got more drunk while playing. So drunk, I had to stop on one of my friend's recommendations. I personally was so drunk I didn't realize this random girl was sitting in the living room who I didn't know. I eventually did realize after I sobered up the next morning. I do remember her walking up to me and telling me things I don't remember at all. But whatever she did tell me led to her grabbing my arm and pulling me outside the house toward a white van. I got in the passenger seat and she got in the driver's seat. I passed out in the van a few minutes after getting in. I woke up to find myself in the van, but on an unfamiliar road. I asked her where are we going. She told me that we were going to her house because she wanted to spend the night with me. I looked through the back window and saw my cousin's BMW tailing behind us. I quickly realized what was happening and asked the girl to pull over. And I told her that I had to throw up. I jumped outside the van and ran to my cousin's car. I made sure to take a picture of the girl's van to get the license plate before getting in. We both sped away and my cousin explained everything. He said he wanted me to join him for a drinking session in his backyard with some of his friends, so he went looking for me. When the sister told him that I walked out with some random girl, he ran outside and saw a white van taking off with me in the passenger seat, passed out. So he got in his BMW and started tailing the van. The fact that this happened to me and the assumed safety of my cousin's house party, and that it actually worked on me, a 23-year-old guy, is what scares me the most. We called the police and showed them the picture of the van's license plate I took. They tracked the van to some abandoned subway station. 5 cops went there and my cousin and I followed. We waited outside the station entrance and the officers went inside. Only 10 minutes later, the officers came out with the girl and 3 other large men in cuffs. They placed them in the cars, and 1 officer searched the white van, and the other 4 searched the whole station. What they found still disturbs me to this day. In the van, they found a bloody axe, chains, and duct tape. In the station, they found 4 bodies and 7 kidnapped young adults. Those 2 men were the killers. I still wonder to this day, where would I be now if my cousin had not saved me?